Okay, it's 6 o'clock. I'm going to call the meeting for the City Council to order. It is February 8th, 2022. Time is 6 p.m. Can we have roll call, please?
Council Agency Authority Member Sullivan.
Here.
Stockton.
Here.
Ritchie.
Here.
Silva.
Here.
Wiley.
Here.
Vice Mayor, Vice Chair Roberts.
Here.
Mayor Chair Roulette.
I am here. So if you would please all stand with me for a moment of silence, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, we will move on to the approval of the agenda. I know that we have a amendment to the agenda, Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think the only thing that we really have is just under item 8D, we are continuing that item to the March 8th meeting, but it's so noticed on the agenda.
Okay. With that, I'll take a motion.
I move approval. Wiley.
Thank you.
So well second.
Thank you, sir. We'll roll call vote.
Councilmember Sullivan.
Yes.
Councilmember Stockton.
Yes.
Councilmember Ritchie.
Yes.
Councilmember Silva.
Yes.
Councilmember Wiley.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Roberts.
Yes.
Mayor Roulette.
Yes, thank you. So we will move on to the approval of the minutes. And this looks like for the special meeting and for the draft minutes of January 25th. Can I have a motion?
So motion approved.
Thank you, sir.
This is Stockton, I'll second.
Thank you. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Sullivan.
Sorry, I lost my button. Yes.
Councilmember Stockton.
Yes.
Councilmember Ritchie.
Yes.
Councilmember Silva.
Yes.
Councilmember Wiley.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Roberts.
Yes.
Mayor Roulette.
Yes, thank you. We will move on to 5 presentations. There are none tonight, so we'll move on to 6. The consent calendar. Is there anyone on this city council that wants to pull A, B, or C? I see none. I'm going to open it up to the floor. Is there anyone that wants to pull either A, B, or C off? I see, well, Jane Shamia, I know what she's calling in for. I don't think she wants to pull this. I'll open the mic for her, but I don't think she wants to pull that. Jane?
Sorry, I wasn't on mute. Did I raise my hand timely? Sorry.
No, I think you're coming up, if I'm not mistaken, for business of the floor. This right now is just the consent calendar. I'm sorry.
Sorry, I got too excited.
No, that's okay. I know what you're coming on for, and I'll make sure we get you.
Thanks, Ron.
Okay, so we'll bring it back for motion.
Motion to approve.
Thank you.
Wiley second.
Thank you. Roll call vote, please.
Councilmember Stockton.
Yes.
Councilmember Ritchie.
Yes.
Councilmember Silva.
Yes.
Councilmember Wiley.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Roberts.
Yes.
Councilmember Sullivan.
Yes.
Mayor Roulette.
Yes. Okay, so now we'll move to item 7, business of floor. This is time to address the council with any issues that are not on the agenda and that are within this council subject jurisdiction. And I believe we'll go back to Jane Shamia now. So Jane, if you're there, go ahead.
Yes, I am. Thank you. Good evening, Mayor Rolette, City Council members, and City Manager Aaron Bush. I'm Jane Shamia, Superintendent of the Vacaville School District. And I'm just here to thank the city for the partnership that you have with our school district. City Manager Aaron Bush and I meet monthly. I'm grateful for his leadership, his collaboration, and communication. I also know the 3x3 meetings are going well, and those are the 3 city council, 3 board member meetings, and I'm excited that they are becoming focused and purposeful. Our district staff have been invited to participate in various committees and work groups. I know our facility department is part of the project review committee, and there's been other opportunities that we've been invited to participate with you. But I really want to right now just acknowledge the Vacaville Police Department. We have several things that we've done with them that we're so grateful for. We've had a longstanding contract with Youth Services, and they provide mental health interns at our schools. This has been around a really long time, and it's a wonderful program that supports and supplements our school mental health services. The school resource officers are fantastic, led by Sergeant Jason Johnson. Includes Officer Jeremy Johnson, Officer Kelly, Officer Hogue, Officer Griffith. They all work really well with the site administrators who love them. They provide a lot of intervention and support to our students and families. And by the way, we continue to have our we have a class both at Wood and Vaca High on policing in today's society, and it is taught by a retired police officer, Danny Over. But last but not least, I want to especially call out and appreciate Sergeant Johnson. He has been amazing. He's initiated trainings in emergency threat assessment for our staff. He keeps us updated on emerging issues or concerns with families. He's been a great support at our board meetings. He stays in regular contact with Ed Santapadre, our associate superintendent, who's our contact for the PD. They have their own sort of system of communication. And Sergeant Johnson knows everybody in the district. He knows who to call when he has a question. He knows everybody by name. So that's all. I just want to thank you for the partnership, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak tonight.
Well, thank you so much. And we truly appreciate the partnership with our Vacaville Unified School District and everything you've done for the district. And thank you for coming on tonight. I'm going to close public comment, and we will move on to the next item.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This first public hearing item is a revisitation of the downtown specific plan. I'm going to turn it over to Miss Erin Morris, our Community Development Director.
Hold on. Yeah. So, hi, once again, it's Greg Ritchie, City Council Member, District 2. I will have to recuse myself. I have an office in downtown Vacaville. I hope soon I'll be able to serve the city and be a part of these votes and participate, but we're waiting for the words to come back from the attorneys. So until then, I'll recuse myself. I'll log off, and you guys can call me when we come back on the meeting.
I will text you. Thank you, Council Member. So, Mr. City Manager, go ahead and start.
Yes, thank you. So to complete that, we'll turn it over to Miss Erin Morris from our Community Development Department, who will give you a quick update on this item.
Good evening, Mayor Rolette and council members. I don't have a presentation, but just a few brief remarks. As you all recall, this item was before you on January 25th, and it was approved, although then we had a noticing issue. So it's here again for one more final action. There are no changes to the plan or any of the approval instruments. In the staff report, we did give the council a little additional information about how adoption of this plan as proposed will support desirable downtown businesses and will help facilitate some of these small infill housing projects that will contribute to the vibrancy of downtown Vacaville. At this point, staff's recommendation and the planning commission as well is that the council adopt the subject resolutions. Again, thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm going to open it up to public comment. I see no public comment. I'm going to close public comment, bring it back for motion.
This is Silva, motion to approve.
Wiley second. Wiley second.
Thank you. Roll call vote, please.
Councilmember Sullivan,
Yes.
Councilmember Stockton,
Yes.
Councilmember Silva,
Yes.
Councilmember Wiley,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Roberts,
Yes.
Mayor Rowland.
Yes, and I'm getting hold of Greg right now. And we'll move on to item 8B, I believe.
Yes, thank you,
Okay,
Mr.
you can come back
Mayor.
on.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council. This next public hearing item is several actions before the City Council tonight related to our general plan and energy conservation and action strategy, as well as an update to the land use and development code. Christina Love, our senior planner from community development, is here to make a presentation for the council.
Thank you, City Manager. Good evening, council members. I am here before you again. I know we've been back and forth with the Land Use and Development Code off and on for the last few years. I am here finally to present it to you in hopes of getting it through to the adoption phases. Next, first slide, please. So tonight, we are asking that by simple motion, you adopt the subject resolution, which reaffirms the general plan EIRs to show that the Land Use and Development Code is consistent and within the scope of those EIRs. Also to introduce the subject ordinance, which repeals and replaces a number of divisions of the current Land Use Development Code with some final draft divisions that we will be speaking on. Next slide, please. General objectives of the Land Use and Development Code update for the last few years has been to really update our Land Use and Development codes. The last comprehensive update was in 1990. So quite a few of the policies needed to be reviewed and revised. So this is going to be consistent with the general plan, including mixed use development policies identified in the general plan. It's kind of one of those newer items. It presents or it promotes high quality design through significantly clear.
Can we make sure someone mutes? If you're not speaking, please mute your phone, please. Sorry, go ahead.
No worries. Okay. So through significantly clearer and more effective regulations, primarily one of our major goals was to find ways to delete duplicative language and try to put as much as we could into tables. Tables are much easier to understand and to follow than long lists of language. So with that, it also makes it a more clear language with more modern terms and definitions, establishes permitting process for increased efficiency and predictability for development. Also is consistent with state and federal law, as specifically state law continues to change on an annual basis. So this brings us up to date, and we'll make sure that we continue to stay updated. And then it's a concise, understandable, and easy to use code. Next slide, please. Here you see a list of the various sections of the Land Use and Development Code. You'll notice it's not the entire code, but these are the sections of the code that needed to be updated. The majority of the work was identified in the zoning ordinance, and that zoning ordinance is effectively split up into 4 different parts depending on what the task is or the direction or information that's being sought. Next slide, please. To summarize the immense work that was done from the last few years, One of the significant things, or the first and foremost significant thing that was changed, as I briefly mentioned, was the format and the structure of the overall land use and development code. We increased the graphics in the tables, decreased that duplicative language, and reorganized the zoning code itself, going from a long list of different sections to a more summarized and concise four-part section. Next slide, please. A second part of the Land Use and Development Code is the zoning map. The zoning map is the visual representation of that Land Use and Development Code. That identifies the boundaries and locations of the various districts defined within the code. Changes to the zoning districts are required to be reflected within the zoning map. The Land Use and Development Code requires amending our current zoning map. And at this time, you'll notice that we do not have a zoning map before you. We figured it was beneficial to go through the Land Use and Development Code, get everything clearly defined and adopted prior to updating that zoning map. So we will be bringing that zoning map through the ordinance review process as well. So it will be presented to the Planning Commission. We are aiming for the March Planning Commission for their review and recommendation, and then of course to follow presenting the map to City Council for determination and decision. Next slide, please. To highlight some of the changes to anticipate within that zoning map, the Land Use and Development Code does create a new commercial district, the Highway Commercial District. This is consistent and actually part of the general plan. So that Highway Commercial District further promotes and supports the general plan. It also renames and redefines commercial or recreation commercial district, which is being removed or replaced by a parks and recreation district. Essentially the same thing. It's any kind of park and recreation, but more clearly defined. It also renames community facilities district to public facilities, which is a very simple change. It also merges commercial service district with industrial services. So the same uses are going to be present, but it merges those two districts as they are largely consistent and compatible with each other. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, we have started in anticipation with moving forward and the hopeful adoption of the Land Use Development Code. We have started the zoning map review process. And again, we'll be bringing it to Planning Commission and City Council for that final approval. There will be to make sure that the effective dates of both the Land Use and Development Code and the map are the same, so we don't have inconsistent definitions with the zoning map. The Land Use and Development Code update will not be effective until the zoning map is effective. So essentially the effective date will be extended to match and meet the same date as the zoning map. And the zoning map would be effective 30 days after the second reading and adoption by City Council. So that's when the Land Use and Development Code would be effective as well. Next, please. The next major piece of work that was done with Land Use and Development Code was citywide development standards. This is more specifically related to the zoning code. The part one, what you see on the screen, part two and part three, there are district regulations where it clearly defines what the base districts are, overlay districts, how to develop those particular districts and parcels within those districts. Also allows for clear use classifications or what a land use is and what's allowed or what's conditioned, what is a conditional approval. Part three builds on that with some of the supplemental standards. It goes a little bit more into some of the state law pieces you see here, the affordable housing density bonus, other such incentives that are related to state law. One of the main things we did in this particular section is more generally refer to state law. These are areas that change on an annual basis. And so it was more effective to refer to the state law. So we cite those sections in the state law. And then it more clearly adds tables and graphics to some of the performance standards and time standards to make it easier to understand. Next slide, please. Another significant change, you'll really notice it more on the map than you will inside the Land Use and Development Code. But part of the Land Use and Development Code does remove and repeal all of the policy plans. Policy plans had a form and a function in the early 90s. It was essentially an overlay that had special uses and different development standards. Most of our policy plans are nearly built out or simply refer to the Land Use and Development Code. So their function is kind of run its course. So policy plans will be deleted, and the parcels within those policy plans will defer to the base zoning, or the base zoning that's identified in the policy plan. On the screen, you see as an example, this is just one of the policy plans we have. This is the Interchange Business Park Policy Plan. You could click the next button, please. You'll see there are 3 areas identified in this policy plan, and within the text of the language identifies what uses are allowed, how it will be developed. An example is Area 1, which is a small portion right along I-80 and Vacaville, is identified in the policy plan as office commercial. But based on what the definitions of the allowable uses are in that particular area, it translates more consistently with Land Use and Development Code zoning for highway commercial or just general office commercial. So that's something that's being evaluated as to what would be best based on what the policy plan is. The next arrow, please. Similarly, Area 2 is identified as office industrial. That translates to the commercial/industrial service district, or the IS district. And the next button. And then Area 3 is clearly industrial, and so that would remain and translate into the industrial part. So this is just one example. We do have 18 different policy plans, so I am carefully going through each policy plan to make sure that we make it consistent with just the policy plan, and translate that properly into the zoning codes. Next, please. Additionally, here you see, this is currently on our zoning map. This is a small little example of the various policy plans, but in that list, there are also specific plans. What the Land Use and Development Code is proposing to do is take those previously approved standalone documents, which are effectively mini zoning documents for those developments. And instead of having them be a separate document, actually codify them and make them part of our Land Use and Development Code, and also make it more transparent as to what areas are impacted or are applicable to specific policy plans. So it gives the specific plans a more clear, effective zoning district. Next slide, please. In early November, we released our final draft for public review. Through the course of November and December, we did receive a few inquiries and had a few other conversations from Counter, as well as other meetings that did result in a few revisions prior to January, or by the end of December, I should say. Specifically, those 3 are recycling facilities. There was a question as to whether or not the unmanned containers that are often found in parking lots were identified within our Land Use and Development Code. And it was a little bit of a gray area. So with a little bit of additional research, we did revise the definitions of recycling facilities to specifically call out unmanned clothing and or textile donation centers, or donation containers, as that's what they're identified by the various laws and codes. The downtown specific plan, now that that is a approved and standalone document, it's proposed to merely take that document and plop it into a specific section of the Land Use and Development Code, similar to what we're doing with the existing 5 specific plan documents. And that would be added as a subsection F to the specific plan chapter of the Land Use and Development Code. The map revisions would also be incorporated along with the remainder map revisions that are also part of the Land Use and Development Code. So it all fit in nicely. And lastly, with Sd9 Housing Legislation that occurred at the end of last year, we did add a couple of sections or a couple of references to the specific code sections of state law, government code sections, to various tables and chapters, so that it is clearly referenced and applicable to Sd9. Next slide, please. We took this to Planning Commission January 18th, just last month, where they had a public hearing. During the public hearing, or prior to the public hearing, there were 2 comments that were received. One was a question regarding vested rights. Does the Land Use and Development Code change those vested rights? And based on the law, it does not change vested rights. It only changes things that are moving forward. If there is a vested right, that right is vested in whatever code was applicable at the time. So that part was clarified. And there was also a question, or a request, I should say, from a use in town to consider allowing schools as a conditionally permitted use, a CUP, inside commercial districts. After review and discussion, I'll get a little bit more into the comments in the next slide, but after some review and discussion, the Planning Commission did vote in a 6-0 vote to recommend that City Council adopt the final draft Land Use and Development Code while considering an additional revision to based on the request for CUPs in a commercial district. You could go to the next slide, please. So the request specifically came from the Academy of 21st Century Learning, which is a charter school here in town looking for a new site as they've outgrown their current site and grown beyond what their approved use was. The request initially was to, and the recommendation from Planning Commission was to consider allowing schools into general commercial districts. After some more detailed research after the meeting, staff is actually recommending to allow conditional schools as a conditional use inside the neighborhood districts, the neighborhood commercial district, for the reasons you see here. Neighborhood commercial districts are generally surrounded by residential, whereas general commercial are more often along the highways and apart from residential. So schools would be better served closer to residential areas. Additionally, neighborhood commercial is intended to provide, the definition of the zoning is intended to provide services and needs for those nearby residential units. There was a concern brought up by Commission as well with the cannabis ordinances and land use regulations that were adopted by City Council in the middle of last year, where cannabis could potentially move into general commercial districts and not inside neighborhood commercial districts. So allowing schools in neighborhood commercial district would meet the request up on behalf of 21st Century Learning, but also would potentially prevent or should prevent any cannabis conflicts with that code. Next. Environmental determination, as I mentioned at the beginning, there is the original EIR that was adopted in 2015 with the general plan. And then there was the amendment for the final supplemental EIR when the general plan had to be amended for vehicle miles traveled, but also adopted a new and updated energy conservation action strategy that the ECAS. So together, both of those documents now make the environmental assessment for the general plan. So both of those documents as one piece would reaffirm the Land Use and Development Code is covered within those reviews. Next slide, please. Brings me to the end, that by simple motion, staff recommends that the subject resolution for the environmental review is adopted, reaffirming those general plan EIRs, and then introduce the subject ordinance. And here's where there's kind of that option. Council can either you do see in your packet, there are two different ordinances. There's one ordinance that does not address the neighborhood zoning for schools, and the alternate does include neighborhood zoning for schools. So it'd be depending on which way council would like to go, introduce that subject ordinance.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to open up to public comment. Seeing nobody from public comment, I'm going to close public comment. I'm going to open up for council comments, and I see Council Member Sullivan.
Thank you very much, Mayor. Appreciate it. Thank you, Ms. Love. I appreciate the presentation. First, I just thank you. I know this has been a tremendous amount of work. It's a very dense and complicated and laborious subject. And I know going through lines and lines and lines of code and updating is a massive process. And we've been going at this for a couple of years. So huge thank you to you and your team and the consultants to get this process done. You just kind of piqued my interest on slide 14. You mentioned cannabis retail. Would that same carve out provision for the schools apply to liquor, tobacco, and adult novelty stores? I'm assuming it probably would, but just wanted to make sure that carve out would apply to not just dispensaries, but all sorts of adult kind of retail establishments.
Yes, generally the adult kind of retail establishments are not permitted inside liquor stores, or if they are conditionally permitted. That would be like a liquor store or 7-Eleven kind of a thing, are conditional use permits. Adult oriented businesses are general commercial or up in the industrial areas. So that would not be a conflict with the neighborhood commercial either.
Great, thank you, I appreciate it.
Yes, sir.
All right, thank you. I'll entertain motion.
Sullivan on motion, Mayor.
Thank you, sir.
Second.
And I got a second, but I do see Councilmember Wiley. Did you want to motion or second, or did you want to comment before?
We haven't clarified what we're motioning on. I would think the motion should be on the alternate with the neighborhood schools, but I think we need to be clear since there were two things listed.
That's fair. Nolan, I'm sure that's what you wanted, right?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Jeanette.
And then second, I'll entertain the second again.
I'll do the second.
Okay, either way, it doesn't matter. Roll call vote.
Councilmember Silva,
Yes.
Councilmember Wiley,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Sullivan, or Vice Mayor Roberts,
Yes.
Councilmember Sullivan,
Yes.
Councilmember Stockton,
Yes.
Councilmember Ritchie,
Yes.
Mayor Roulette.
Yes, and then we'll move on to item.
Mayor, I'm going to go ahead and read the ordinance title.
You know, it wouldn't be right if I just went and asked you to do it, so please.
Ordinance of the City Council of the City of Vacaville repealing and replacing divisions 14.01, 14.02, 14.04, 14.05, 14.09, 14.11, 14.12, 14.15, 14.17, 14.18, 14.25, 14.26, and 14.27 of the City of Vacaville Municipal Code with a proposed final draft of the Land Use and Development Code update.
Thank you, Madam City Clerk. I appreciate it. As always, we will roll to 8C, Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of the City Council. This next item is several actions and one related to the Allison Apartment Project that the council seen before. Albert Eno, our senior planner, will provide the council with an update presentation on this particular item for you.
Thank you, City Manager Bush. This is Albert Eno, Senior Planner with Community Development. Next slide. A little bit of background information about where this project came from. It was originally submitted in February 2021. The City Council considered the disposition development and loan agreement in September 2021. They did approve it 5-1, and we continued our review process of the project. We presented this project to the Planning Commission in November 2021, and the Planning Commission voted 7-0 to recommend approval of the project. Then we presented the project with Planning Commission's recommendation to City Council in December. And City Council discussed many concerns and comments about the project and ultimately voted 6-1 to continue the project to allow the applicant and staff to address City Council's concerns. They also had an additional direction for staff to bring this project back to the Planning Commission for review. After considering City Council's comments, the applicant submitted a revised project in January, and City staff presented this revised project to the Planning Commission at a Planning Commission meeting in January, and Planning Commission voted 7-0 to recommend approval of the revised project. Next slide. And here's the revised project. It does still include a density bonus, plan development, and tentative parcel map, but it's a request to construct a 135-unit affordable apartment project on a 3.65 acre site located at the southeast corner of Allison Drive and Nut Tree Parkway. Next slide. A little bit of information about where the project is located. It is within the Allison Priority Development Area. The original Priority Development Area was approved in 2015, outlined in blue. Then there was an expansion in 2019 that's in pink. This area is intended to provide a mixed-use development comprised of retail, jobs, and residential developments. You can see all the spots where residential projects have been approved in the past. We are currently looking at the red site that's outlined on the graphic in front of you. Next slide. The site plan remains the same. The building footprint is substantially the same with parking layouts. Access to the site will be provided off Allison Drive with that secondary emergency access to the transit center. And there is still that portion that's reserved for the future commercial property. Next slide. This slide shows a comparison between the original proposal that was considered by City Council in December that showed 187 units. The revision has been brought down to 135 units, which changes the density from 70 units per acre to 50 units per acre. Those changes also reduce the height of the building from 70 feet to 60 feet. And the applicant was also able to find more parking spaces. They increased to 139 spaces. The reduction in unit count and the increased spaces changed the parking ratio from 0.7 to 1 stall per unit. There was also an increase in the total amount of common open space provided by the project, and the setbacks for the project itself remained the same. Next slide. This graphic shows the before and after comparison as viewed from Allison Drive. The original project showed a 6-story building on Allison Drive, and the applicant is proposing to revise that to 4 stories. Next slide. As viewed from the transit center, you'll see the western portion that's to the left was reduced from the 6 stories to 4 stories, and the right portion was reduced from 6 stories to 5 stories. Next slide. And this is the view from Nut Tree Parkway. Again, that portion along Allison Drive reduced to 4 stories. The portion closer to the transit center reduced to 5 stories. Next slide. Council did have many comments from the original December meeting, and the applicant has revised the project to address those comments. It starts with parking. The parking was changed by reducing the number of units, but also increasing the number of stalls. And the applicant is now providing 1 stall per unit. The building size was also a comment from council. They were concerned about the size of the building as viewed from Allison Drive. And the building itself was originally proposed at 70 feet tall, but the applicant has since revised to be 50 feet as viewed from Allison Drive, and 60 feet for that portion of the building that's closer to the transit center. On-site amenities were also revised. The original project proposed to have about 13,600 square feet worth of common open space. And this project was revised to include a rooftop terrace outdoor area, which increases the total square footage by 2,200 square feet, brings up the total to 15,800 square feet. Based off of what the code says, the applicant's only required to be providing 13,500 square feet. It's 100 square feet per unit. So they are meeting that they are now meeting that open space requirement for on-site amenities. Next slide. There were also comments about storage, that the request to remove balconies would result in possible storage issues for the residents. The code requires 50 square feet of balcony space per unit, and the applicant was requesting to not provide any balconies. And the way that the applicant chose to address this issue was by providing a storage closet per unit, and those storage closets range between 7 square feet to 21 square feet. Council also had some comments about leasing preferences, wanting to make sure that the units were leased only to people who either worked or lived in Vacaville. We took a look at that and worked with the applicant, and we found that it would be in fact illegal. It would violate fair housing law, and it would also eliminate funding opportunities that the applicant will be able to apply for to be able to fund the construction of this project. But there are some ways that the applicant can address this particular comment. They are going to be working on showing preferences to those who do work or reside within Vacaville, but they'll also be working on some advertisement specifically for people in Vacaville. And this is addressed in the disposition development and loan agreement that will also be before the council tonight. The last comment that was presented by City Council was wanting to pin down the details about how the income levels would work for the rental of the unit. For this project, all units, besides the manager units, will be rented to people who have area median incomes of 80% or less of that AMI. And this is the typical bracket layout that you could expect to see for a project that has that, where they do break up the brackets from 80%, some for 60%, some for 50%, and some for 30%. Next slide. So this project does include a density bonus. State law does describe that underneath section 65915, and what it says is a city shall grant one density bonus with incentives or concessions, waivers or reductions of development standards, and parking ratios for projects containing affordable units. What the code says for a project that has 100% dedicated for affordable units that are within a half mile of a major transit stop, that no limit can be imposed by the municipality to any density bonus request, and that the applicant is entitled to 4 concessions or exceptions to development standards, as well as a building height increase of 3 stories or 33 feet. For projects that have 20% dedicated for affordability and located within a half mile of a major transit stop, no parking ratios beyond 0.5 spaces can be required, but for this particular project, they're providing 1 space per unit. This project proposal has 100% of, will be dedicating 100% of the units for affordability, and it's also located within a half mile of major transit stop, the intermodal station next door. Next slide. So what are the exceptions or concessions that the applicant is requesting for this project? Well, there's the parking. The applicant's requesting to reduce the parking requirement from 212 stalls to 139 stalls. The original proposal did have 295 stalls that they were proposing, but because of the units being decreased, the parking requirements also decrease, and that's where that 212 stalls is. They would be providing 139 stalls. Again, a reminder, municipalities cannot require more than 0.5 stalls or 68 stalls for this project. The applicant's also requesting concessions for setbacks to decrease side yard and rear yard setbacks as noted on the screen. We did originally bring before the commission a concession for common open space, but as noted before, the applicant has addressed common open space and they are now meeting that requirement. The applicant is also requesting to reduce the amount of private open space for this project by decreasing the balcony requirement of 50 square feet per unit to none. And the applicant is also requesting to increase the building height from 48 feet to 60 feet. Again, state law is saying when you have a project that has 100% affordability and it's located within a half mile of a transit stop, that you cannot limit the building height below 81 feet. Next slide. So we do have some changes to the conditions, and this was noted in the Planning Commission staff report, and it's also identified in the conditions. We originally had conditions 5, 8, and 9 in the project that identified a deed restriction, a leasing incentive program, and affordability summary. And we learned that those are topics that need to be covered under the Disposition Development and Loan Agreement. That is a separate document that is under consideration by the City Council tonight. So to avoid conflict between how Council votes on the Disposition Development and Loan Agreement, we are requesting, and the Planning Commission supports, removing those conditions from the conditions of approval. Next slide. So we had our Planning Commission meeting last month and presented this project before them. The Commission considered the comments from the public and staff's presentation, and they made a recommendation for City Council. And that City Council would approve this project because it meets the required findings. It complies with the general plan and zoning and development standards as allowed with those concessions by the density bonus. It provides more housing, and it is a good design. It's located next to that transit center, shoppings and jobs within the Allison Fire Redevelopment area, and it addresses City Council's concerns. Next slide. The Ddla amendment is also under consideration by City Council, and Emily Cantu is here to explain a little bit about that amendment.
Thank you, Albert. Yes, good evening, Mayor, Vice Mayor, and Council members. This is Emily Cantu, the Housing and Community Services Director. Just briefly, the changes made to the project do require an amendment to the Ddla to decrease the number of units, to increase the number of parking spaces, to allow rents to be restricted to lower income levels, and to add a leasing preference for applicants who live or work in Vacaville. And then we did see a couple little typographical errors that were corrected. Next slide, please. Last, with the changes, there is a request from the developer to increase the city loan with a $3 million construction loan. The reasons for the request are the decreased revenue with less units and a loss of economy of scales that the larger project had achieved, increased material costs and difficulty getting construction materials. Interest rates have gone up, reducing the amount of loan they are able to obtain, and just a general shortage of subcontractors to bid on the project. Next slide, please. So for that construction loan, staff is requesting that those funds come from the American Rescue Plan Act. At this time, the low and moderate income housing funds are not available, but future revenues could offset the ARPA funds if the City Council so desired, from either the permanent local housing allocation or potential loan revenues that come into that fund. Otherwise, the council could decide to use the ARPA funds for this project and use the future revenues into the low-income housing fund for other affordable housing projects, such as a new affordable housing construction project, or to implement the housing strategy that you'll be looking at implementation strategies for shortly here in a couple of months. So if approved, the construction loan repayments do need to be used for another eligible ARPA expense until the end of 2026. And after that, the repayments would no longer be restricted. Next slide.
So where we are with this project is there is a recommendation for City Council, and it is to reaffirm the general plan environmental impact report, to also approve the density bonus and plan development and tentative parcel map request for the Allison apartment. It's also to approve the amendment to the Ddla as described by Emily and approve the city loan increase of $3 million. That is it for our presentation. The applicant is also here with his team, and they have a presentation for City Council as well.
Yeah, before I call on them, you know, I'm a little disappointed with the presentation was fine, but it just really feels like it's being driven by staff tonight. Staff usually takes a step back and lets the city council do their thing. I really feel like this was almost overboard. Hey, you know, a whole page of the planning commission and what they've said. And I've sat up here for 14 years and have never seen a page of everything that the planning commission has done. I'm just disappointed with it. I'm going to let it roll and I'll let the applicant come on, but it just let the city council decide. And that's what I would ask for. So I don't know who's on the line for the applicant.
Mr. Mayor, this is John Cicerone speaking.
Great, John. How are you, sir?
Ron, I'm excellent, and I appreciate the opportunity. Ron, if you feel strongly that I shouldn't run a presentation, I have absolutely no trouble deferring to your desires.
No, John, this is your job, or project, I should say. Go ahead.
Well, and I appreciate that, and thank you so much, sir, for letting me do that. We have been at this since 2019, so I do appreciate a couple of minutes here to speak about it. Next slide, please. I'd like to start by talking a little bit about who we are and what we do. And we specialize in affordable housing. We've been doing it for over 30 years. It's basically myself and my partner, Cyrus Yosefi. The key element to take from this slide is that we are not only the general contractor who builds our own projects, but we are also the general partners who stay in the project. We don't build and sell. We're making investments in your community, and we stay in our investments at least for the first 15 years. And we also manage all our own communities through our own property management company. Next slide, please. We've won many awards nationally, regionally, and locally. The picture in the top right is a little building in Bellevue that won Best Rehabilitation in the state of California in 2020. Right below it is Cannery Lofts in Davis, right up the street. And in 2018, we won the award for the best affordable housing project in California.
Hey, John.
We went on to be
John, I don't want to cut you off. If you can just stay focused to what this project's going to bring to Vacaville, that's what I would appreciate.
Okay, let me just finish by talking about on this slide, the Warehouse Artist Loft, the third picture. And the only reason I want to raise that is it did win an award in 2015 from the Urban Land Institute Best Healthy Place Award. And what's unique about it is it has no balconies. There's no private space, but it did win the Healthy Place Award. Next slide, please. I think we know the history of Allison, and that it started when the city was looking at a low density, maybe 30 unit or so to the acre type project. We saw the space near the transit center. We were doing downtown urban infill, smart growth projects that were transit oriented. I've got some pictures of some of ours down below, and that inspired us to propose to the city, next slide, a higher density project. And when we first looked at it back in 2019 and 2020, we were looking at about 100 units per acre. But at 100 units per acre, the 99 unit project, we had a huge funding gap in excess of $10 million that we couldn't fill. And we were able to solve the funding gap by adding density. And so the first application that we made to the city, which was in early 2021, was the building in the upper right-hand corner, which was 167 units. But after several months of study with the city, we determined that there were some loading issues associated with it, and the building was rotated into the configuration shown in the lower left-hand corner. And that was the building that was brought to the council in December. And I think we had some tough discussions at the city council, next slide please, which resulted in an improved building that we've brought back tonight. And the building that's before you tonight has been lowered so that the area on Allison is 3 levels, about 42 feet overall, even though there are elements of it that extend a little bit higher, like the stairwells. And then it rises to 4 levels closer to the commercial center. And what you get is a massively improved building that's much lighter and has improved articulation and curb appeal from Allison Drive. Next slide, please. By reducing the building height, we eliminated a number of units and reduced it to 135 units. which has increased the parking. And I think the goal here was really to get to at least one parking space for every tenant. And we're pretty close to that. We have eight guest parking spaces. We have a total of 139 parking spaces. So we end up with 131 spaces for 135 tenants. And I want to remind the council that this is a gated community with a parking management plan. And so I think we've really resolved the parking, and the 1:1 parking ratio for us is a home run, because we're normally building transit-oriented development projects in the 0.6 to 0.8. Next slide, please. One thing I'd like to really stress to council is how robust our amenity package is on this site. Though the site may appear compact, we're offering quite a bit. We've got a non-smoking building with an exterior smoking shelter. We have an outdoor lounge, and these are pictures of some of the amenities from our other projects. That lounge picture is from Cannery up the street. We have a tot lot, and that's a picture of a tot lot from our Truckee Artist Loft. We have Hoops Court, and that's a Hoops Court up at our summer park project in Crescent City. And I'd also like to stress that we have a lot of indoor amenities too. We've got over 1,800 square feet in the community room and fitness room, which will also have a little outdoor patio. And I've got a picture of what one of our fitness rooms look like. And though we haven't programmed the furniture yet for that area, it will have, as you'd expect, couches, some type of recreational amenity, whether it's ping pong or pool, we don't know. And it would be our intent to put in a small kitchen, really used mostly for reheating, as long as it's residential grade and not commercial. Next slide, please. Even though we have an existing robust amenity package, we've enhanced it. And the inspiration for our enhancement was one of the most used amenities in all our projects, which is a terrace that we built in our Warehouse Artist Lofts project. And we use that as a model for what we envisioned putting on the third floor roof overlooking Allison. And in addition to the roof terrace amenity, we're also going to be providing additional storage in the way of little hallway closets, which range from 7 to about 20 square feet per tenant. Though the roof terrace itself is going to be more oriented towards cooking and lounge, I think there was an interest expressed at the Planning Commission to do a community garden. And we do have a community garden at the Wall Terrace. It's very popular, and we do intend to replicate that and have one exclusively for the use of our tenants. Next slide, please. Our solution on how we're going to market the building towards community members who have a tie to Vacaville is through what we call a incentive leasing program. We've done this on 2 other projects, in our Cannery project in Davis and at our Truckee Artist Loft project in Truckee. The pre-incentive picture that you see here is from Tall in Truckee, and that project was geared toward artists. And so we quantified through a score the preferences that we wanted to ensure that we leased to artists. And we were very successful in doing that. I have a hypothetical list of points here as to what the preference might look like for Allison. 2 points if you work in Vacaville, 2 points if you live in Vacaville. I put in 2 points if you don't require a parking space, only because this is transit oriented, and that should be something that I think should be rewarded. 1 point if you're in Solano, but not Vacaville. 1 point if you live in Solano, but not Vacaville. You get a maximum of 6 points per household. We would end up scoring applicants and ranking them, and then using this as a way to lease the project to people who have a tie to the community. We have to be careful in doing this that we don't violate fair housing. And if we get too granular, we risk doing that and disenfranchising an applicant who might otherwise have an opportunity to lease. Next slide, please. Yes.
That's hypothetical. You're not saying that that's actually what you're going to do. That's something that you could do, correct?
Mr. Mayor, correct. And the mechanism for doing this is that in the Ddla, there's a management plan that the city has to approve every year. And so prior to leasing in the first year, we would be submitting our preferences to the city for review and discussion at that time.
And why couldn't we do that before we approve project? Why couldn't we have these things locked in before we approved a project?
This is Emily Cantu, the Housing Community Services Director. I can add a little bit to John's description of the Ddla. The Ddla does require that management plan have a preference for people that live or work in Vacaville. So that will always be a preference. What they may change over time would be potentially the other points. But there will always be required for 55 years a preference for those who live or work in Vacaville.
And Emily, will that come back to the council? Can we approve that, or is that?
That would typically be done at the staff level.
Okay. Go ahead, John.
Great, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And that brings me to one of the final slides here, which discusses the income targeting. Thank you. And there was a request for us to look at deeper income targeting, which we did. And the table on the left shows that we were at 10% of the units at 30% AMI, and we're now at 20% of the units at 30% AMI. And the way Allison is set up is we're actually using the average income test IRS set aside. And so the 30, 50, 60, 80% allocations that you see will achieve an overall building average of 57%. And that's what the IRS regulatory agreements will hold us to over time. And to do this, we've also asked for some project-based vouchers. And it'd be our hope that we'd be able to secure those to help offset the income. I think that the net result of these changes to the project is the request for the $3 million to help balance the project. For our next slide, please, for our anticipated financing application, which is going to be coming up in February 2022. Our financing plan is to use the CalHFA MIP, which is the mixed income program, as one of our gap sources. And if we're successful in that competition, we'll automatically be awarded the companion Ddla, the California Debt Limit Allocation Committee, tax exempt bonds, as well as the tax credit equity. And all that would be happening in the applications pretty much starting in February. I think February 11th is the current deadline. The awards would probably occur in the second quarter sometime. And it's at that point that we would know whether or not we'd be able to finance and build this year. And if in fact we do win the awards, we'd be probably closing the financing sometime in the late part of the fourth quarter and starting construction, probably a 2-year build. And it'd be our hope that by 2025, we'd be leasing. I think that concludes my presentation. And I would certainly hope that if the council gives us the chance, I can absolutely guarantee that we would build a building that you'd all be very, very proud of. And thank you.
Thanks, John. I'm going to open up public comment. Looks like I have one hand up. We'll go ahead and take the caller.
Yeah, good evening. This is Mary Nelkins. I'll start by saying I think it's much better, and I appreciate that the developer is somewhat willing to work with the concerns that the council and residents had. I kind of wonder about that rooftop access, only because it seems to be to the far edge of one of the towers as they describe them. So is it a really long way then for the opposite people on the opposite tower to get to? I mean, it'd be kind of nice if it were somewhat equal distance for all residents to access. And again, you know, I appreciate closets as opposed to no space whatsoever, but it seems like nobody's going to ever be able to barbecue there because you can't barbecue in an inside closet. And I cannot imagine trying to take all the food, utensils, all the other trappings for barbecuing all the way across to that rooftop access, and then taking your food all the way back and having it be cold by the time you got back. That's it.
Thank you. Did we have anyone that wants to comment from staff? Emily?
Sure, I think there is also going to be a second lounge and barbecue outdoor area at the ground level of the complex. So tenants will have a choice if they would want to enjoy the rooftop terrace or the ground level terrace. And I think sometimes with apartment living, I'm not sure that barbecuing is allowed on the outdoor patios of their units. I'm not sure. I'd have to check with the developer may know based on their property management plans. But I think if they want to enjoy the outdoors and barbecue outdoors, they'd have a couple options of where they would like to do so.
Great. Next caller looks like ending 211. 211, you're muted. There you go.
Hi, can you hear me? This is
Yes.
Alicia Minion.
Hi, Alicia. Go
Okay,
ahead.
great. Great, thank you. All right, so I don't have any issue with the project, but what I do have issues with is the amount of public funding that is being provided to the developer for this particular project. And so we have these $3 million extra in ARPA funds. And so I think when council is actually, and the staff is determining whether or not to approve it, I think it's really important that the project, given the amount of public funds that's being provided, ensure that it's going to actually provide housing that meets the needs of those that really need it. So I'm talking about extremely low, very low, because to me, it could be construed to be a gift of public funds if you are using those funds for a particular project that the market can already provide and bear. So this particular project, for example, has a lot of studio apartments. Who rent studio apartments? It's generally people in that very low income level anyway. So if that's that's who you're renting to, and the market already provides a studio apartment at a rate that is rented already to very low income individuals, then you're not really improving the situation. There's no additionality. Does that make sense? So I question the additionality that this project is actually going to achieve with regards to housing those that really, really need it. Now, the other problem I have is there's no evidence that I could see, no deep analysis that shows that in fact the developer is somehow needing the $3 million. Are we just simply improving their profit margin? And it sounds like, and I'm not trying to criticize the developer, I really appreciate what he's doing, the line of business he's in. However, you really need to show that in fact, you need this money and you're going to provide housing to those that really need it so that you're providing actually a public purpose. Public funds should result in a public purpose. And without that evidence to show that in fact, you're in the red without it, I just think it's irresponsible for us to actually give them the additional funds. And additionally, these funds are ARPA funds. This is federal money. And, I think that this brings up a Davis-Bacon Act issue where the developer will have to pay prevailing wage. And I'm not talking prevailing wage under state law. I'm talking about federal prevailing wage, which may be very similar to the state prevailing wage. And so I think that staff needs to seek the advice from the Department of Industrial Relations to figure this out before you would approve this project. And anyway, so those are the comments I have for now. Thank you.
Thank you. I see no other comments. I'm going to close public comment. I'm going to bring it back to our council. I'm going to start with Council Member Silva. Go ahead, sir.
All right. Thank you. All right. So I think I'll begin with my comments. First, I was actually fortunate enough to actually tour about 4 other facilities on Friday. And one of the facilities I checked out that was mentioned was the Wall, had the outdoor area. I thought they were pretty well maintained. Areas actually pretty vibrant. I think one of the things that this is just me looking from outside, one of the things that made the Wall probably successful for what it is it really targeted artists and musicians, and that was very evident in the overall design and layout of that facility. A couple of the other places that were either market rate or combined subsidized or tax breaks with market rate, different units. They had other amenities that I thought were very appealing. I would say that I wouldn't mind living in either one of them. I did have certain concerns I'm just going to kind of list off and perhaps if Emily can answer them. A lot of these I've already sent in an email to her, so I'm just doing my due diligence. So number one of the things I had asked about in the past because of the location of this particular development is the color scheme and how it actually creates a more welcoming, vibrant. So I know the color palette is still attached to it. I also recognize that why put in time to revise the color palette if council may not want to choose to continue with this as is. But I'm hoping that in the future, when we get to that point, that we can reevaluate what colors we use to kind of make the building stand out. On top of that, one of the things that they had at the wall was a beautiful mural. And on this taller unit, I think one of the things that I think would really kind of make this particular building pop is a mural on that northwest corner, on the northwest corner wall of that lower tower that faces Allison, right there at that main entrance from the street. So if there's any way to work some type of work that into this agreement, I understand, the funding would need to come from somewhere, but to where essentially that's something that, there can be a dedication to implementing that, I don't know, say within 10 years, 5-10 years would be nice. One of the things that kind of walking around in those different facilities, as I noticed, there was actually some gas fire pits. I know how we're transitioning, trying to go more electric, how that is problematic. My understanding is this particular project won't have any gas lines, it'll be all electric. So, but I'm curious to know how if they're having barbecue grills, that'll be charcoal or that will be propane. And if they're propane, can we also include a small amenity, whether it be on the garden, rooftop terrace, and that outdoor patio area, if there can be a propane tank, a fire pit. I'm also was reminded and made aware that that garden in particular will be something that the tenants run. So I would encourage, there's different nonprofits throughout the county. I would highly encourage there be some pointed reference to a local nonprofit that's been very helpful in other areas of our city called Sustainable Solano. So I know things change around, but I think they've actually helped maintain our garden year round. The garden that was there, it's winter time, so it wasn't, I can tell there was stuff there at one point, but but there's ways to work in vegetation throughout the year. So I think that would be something that'd be pretty beneficial. One of the public comments was about the location. One of the things that I think is possibly ideal about that particular location, while maybe inconvenience, I think, again, if we're trying to if this is a focal point of our city, there's just something about maximizing that space. I'm really looking forward to seeing the East Main development occur. There's going to be rooftop access on there. There's just something that adds to that element of a sense of community and vibrancy and allows it for that sense of community to be built that I think, that can really tap into. So, and then with appropriate lighting, I think it's something that can really, stand out in a positive way. The one thing that I was hoping that would be avoided, and I see it in the plans within the attachments, but really avoiding a flat flush wall to where it doesn't look like a old school straight motel where you just have straight wall and door, to where there's some type of inset or recessed doors, to where it kind of adds some breakup and character to the outside hallways, which seem relatively long. There is one, so I got 2 more points here. Another point that I want to point out, so in the attachment on the public posted agenda on PDF page 19 and PDF page 20, there's some lined out paragraphs in there. One of them is the breakdown for the percentage of units that will be associated with the AMI. So in there, they're lined out. I just want to clarify, I'm curious as to why. those digits, as far as I can tell, when you round them off, line up with what was presented in this presentation here. So I'd just like to get some clarification that those lined out items are not voided, that is in fact what it is, and that's not being canceled out, I guess, so to speak. The last thing I want to, two more things. So the one is going back to the leasing preferences. I really want to lock in an opportunity for this to serve our local educators. So, we have, I hear different stories. I don't have true hardcore data to support it, but, just even my local neighborhood school, we lost 5 teachers, 4 of them. Part of the reason was, Mike, we're never going to be able to afford a house here. They're coming in credentialed, making $50,000 a year after 2 years, right? So they qualify for living in these particular units. So when we talk about these leasing preferences, at some point we as a community got to pull together and value our teachers as best we can. And I think this is the one unique opportunity in quite a while. And who knows, when we come across another opportunity to truly value our educators and our staff that work within our education system. So I've had different conversations about it, but I'd like to get some more comments on seeing on how we can allocate a preference for our educators, both for Travis Unified and Vacaville, and if it's not for Travis and Vacaville, to where it's a preference just for that particular profession. And on top of that, one of the things I mentioned that I think were very well for the wall is, and it's in their example of giving a preference to musicians or artists. So I'm wondering if those type of professions can be incorporated and valued as well, to kind of add to the vibrancy of our community and give back in different ways through the innovation that ideally that can build, that I've seen happen in those type of facilities where you bring together these cool creative minds and people working things out with each other. And if there's any other way, I'll leave it at that. And so the last thing, that came up in other comments in the past was a public park. So while there are amenities on site, and the amenities that I saw that, they look really nice, they look well kept and clean. I really would like to see, I talked about last time, but I really would like to see us adopt or adapt our Parks and Rec plan, to incorporate a community park along that Gian Way behind Traverse Credit Union, behind mobile units that allows folks from throughout the area to access. So that's all. Thank you.
Emily, can you address Councilmember Silva's concerns, please?
Yes, sir. Thank you very much for the opportunity. This is Emily. I'll start with the first question was regarding the color palette of the building. And yes, the developer is welcoming and ready to work with the city and the planning department when they get to the construction document phase to pick out alternate colors if that's desired. So that could be the point when that occurs. The exterior wall mural, the developer is also ready and willing to incorporate a mural project into the exterior building design. The gas fire pits, I may need to defer to the developer a little bit, but you're right. The propane that's being run to the building is for the laundry dryers only. So there would be no lines to the terrace or the barbecue area at the ground floor level. I don't have an answer. That's where I would defer to the developer regarding propane fire pits. I'll keep going, and then if John would like to answer that. For the garden, yeah, it will be run. It'll be a part of the rooftop terrace, a community garden for the tenants to enjoy and operate to the extent that they desire, and they can certainly contact Sustainable Solano, and I'm confident, and the developer was confident that they would do so because it's enjoyable to work with others who have the same desire regarding a thriving community garden. The flat wall and breaking up the character of the exterior, I will defer to the planning department on that if they don't mind. not my expertise, so I wouldn't want to speak to that this evening. The page 19 and 20 lined out paragraph with the percent of area median income units. You're correct, Councilmember Silva. Those are lined out in the conditions of approval with the Planning Commission, as Albert briefly discussed during his presentation. The income limits are described in the Ddla document instead, and it is worded such that the rents will be restricted to match the tax credit requirements, which if, as the developer described, if the project successfully approved this evening, they will go straight away in just a few days to run through that process to obtain those tax credit equity funds and restrict this project and the rents for 55 years to those income levels that you saw in the presentation and also in the staff report. So they're still in there, they're just in a different document, not the conditions of approval. On the leasing preference, yeah, I had some good conversations with the developer and also the developer's attorney. And their attorney advises a couple reasons that they would not want to get more detailed into who would receive a preference for leasing. One is that the tax credit program requires that the units be available to the general public. And the other is that their attorney advises that they feel fairly confident that they could have a fair housing violation or be sued by the Federal Fair Housing Agency if they restrict too far down, in that if someone with a protected class under the federal law is denied the ability to apply or to access a unit, they could have a problem. So they are desiring to stay with the requirement to have a preference for those who live or work in Vacaville. And Parks and Recreation Master Plan, I would defer on that as well. And I hope I hit all the high points. If the developer wanted to answer on the propane fire pits and or the exterior flat walls.
John Cicerone speaking. With regards to a propane fire pit, I would be willing to provide one. Not quite sure where, but we'd work with our landscape architect so that in the final submittals, there is a propane fire pit. And I'm on the question about the exterior walls. There's a significant amount of articulation already in the facades. Councilmember Silver, was there?
So it was actually the interior walls.
That was what I thought. We're talking about the interior corridors.
Yeah.
You know, Mal Montoya, my architect, are you on?
Yes.
Mal, could I ask you to address the interior corridors, please, and what we could do to address Councilmember Silva's concern?
Can you repeat your concern, Councilman Silva?
Just the architectural design. Is the interior walls going to be completely flush, or is it going to be some type of, I call it character, but are the doorways or something going to be like to where it's recessed or?
Yeah, I mean, currently at each unit, each entry door is recessed up to a foot and a half. The hallways are wide enough that if we needed to provide some additional articulation in there, and obviously at this stage we haven't got into roof design or ceiling designs in our RCP yet, but we definitely can articulate those hallways so they're just not this stark long hallway. So that definitely can be done, sir.
Thank you. And I'm sorry, Emily and John. Can you comment? So on the attachment, on the attachment example, it specifies musicians. So I'm curious to why we can't specify educators and
artists at the Truckee Artist Loft, where we had artists. Artists are actually an IRS protected category, and they're called out in the section in the code section. So you can't specify artists without having any fear about the fair housing violation. And I think as Emily suggested, the concern on our part, council member, that was expressed to us through our attorney is that when we get very granular with the preferences, the applicant pool is so small that we risk disenfranchising somebody and violating fair housing laws.
I would argue that teaching is an art.
I would absolutely concur. And Councilmember Silva, teachers would make incredible tenants, and I would love nothing more than to fill the building, but I can't move away from the fair housing obligations that we have to operate under.
So one more question on that, and I apologize, Council. So if the issue is that we're creating a disparity between diversity, is that fair? So if that's the issue, if the school districts, if the school district can show or reflect that their staff represent the equivalent diversity of what we're providing preference for the city, if it's equivalent, then would that would negate that argument, or what would you? So that I guess that would be that's what a question I would like to get a further answer to. I also understand you. We probably have to consult some folks with that, and it's also my understanding, based on the presentation, that this is something that would be looked at later down the road. So,
yeah, Councilmember Silva, I agree with you, and I think there is some wiggle room in there, and I would like to get some clarification. I know we can't get it tonight, but I agree with what you're saying. With that, I'm going to move on to Councilmember Sullivan.
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate it. Yeah, I've got some notes here. So yeah, I wanted to start off sort of seconding most of Councilmember Silva's points on the style, kind of the color schema, the mural and the graphics, really making it something special and important, kind of a fabric, you know, or blended fabric of the community, and really thinking about community design there. And so I really liked a lot of the points that he just made in that aspect. So I certainly would kind of second all of those points. I love the teacher housing idea as well. You know, I understand the fair housing piece, and I think it's, you know, sort of a case of good intentions causing blockages for other good intentions. But, you know, maybe staff can bring us something back on that at a later date. I think we do have a little bit of time. Additionally, you know, Councilmember Silva and I have been talking about a separate teacher housing project for years now. I'd love to, you know, engage other developers and the school district and staff on that discussion at a later date if that can't happen here. But I think teacher housing in this particular facility would be fantastic. The second piece that I kind of want to put out there, usually I guess I come off a little bit critical or pointed, and that's not really my intention, but I know it happens. First, I wanted to thank the staff and thank the developer, thank the planning commission. I know we've sent this thing back a million times. I feel like it's a much better end product, but I know we probably made your lives difficult for a bit. And I really do appreciate all the effort, all the work, all the back and forth, all the, you know, all the changes and edits and listening to us. And so big thank you to staff, the development team, and our planning commissioners who have had to review and dive into this, you know, ad nauseum several times and really provided some great insight. Second piece is I want to thank Councilmember Silva. He made a site visit to several other properties and really kind of put my mind at ease again on some property management concerns and other pieces. So thank you, Councilmember Silva, for doing your homework and doing it for us and making me feel at ease. I had a couple of concerns in the past couple of meetings, and I think for the most part, I'm pretty good with where we're at. I think I was ready to sort of come into tonight's meeting to really kind of to bat back the inclusionary zoning piece. It's interesting because some of the projects I've been researching are Placer County, as you well know, and Mr. Cicerone, you mentioned one of the projects that I've been referencing, which is the Truckee Artist Loft. And so I think we're probably as close as we're going to get. And that was one of the examples I was kind of looking at. So the detail you shared tonight actually made me feel a lot better about the inclusionary zoning piece and actually a lot more comfortable on that one topic. And that was probably my biggest sticking point. I do appreciate and like the AMI changes. I think the parking is much better. The open space is also better. There was a comment from one caller, and we had some issues at the last meeting and the meeting before that about prevailing wages and financing and the transit center. You know, I just want to make staff double check, triple check, quadruple check that we are meeting all of the guidelines of the financing. Everything's all good. I mean, you're telling us we are, but I just want to make sure we triple check our homework as we're moving forward in this process, especially with the ARP funding. So I'm comfortable moving forward, but it does seem like these big financing questions keep coming up, and that, I just want to make sure that we're triple sure that we're good to go. And then I guess my last comment, and I have two questions, is I would have absolutely loved to see prevailing wages or some sort of labor agreement on this project. I think the struggle that I'm finding in my 4 years of service on the council now, especially in Vacaville, is that there's a tremendous challenge to create living wage jobs, but also to create the housing that the people working those jobs need to live in. And in a lot of cases, sadly, because we don't have the resources to really incentivize some of the things we want, you have to kind of pick and choose and kind of balance. And I'm really hoping that staff come up with some tools and resources through the housing analysis and the housing plan that's coming up, so that in the future we can have some win-wins and we can actually have great local jobs for our trades folks, and we can also have affordable housing for those same folks and other Vacaville residents. So this just kind of underscores the need for us to get creative and build financing and build funding and think towards the future, so that the next time we have a project of this scope, we can kind of get both. I have two quick questions. My first question is probably for Albert, I think. Albert, you said we're going to pull out the leasing incentives. I didn't quite catch what that was. Can you clarify what the leasing incentives piece was that we're pulling out of the Ddla?
We're not pulling it out of the Ddla. We were pulling them out of the conditions. We were double writing them. We had it written in our conditions, but we're also writing them in the Ddla. So to avoid confusion between the two documents, we're removing them from the conditions, and the Ddla will cite.
Perfect. Okay, thank you. That's very helpful. And then my second comment is probably for the developer team. The one thing, I really like the rooftop deck, and it makes a lot of sense to me to expand that space. The one area I do have some concerns, especially with the 2 bedrooms, is, I have a very ninja-like 7-year-old myself, and he would be the first kid to sneak up on that roof and get up there and go play and do some crazy stuff. I do worry about unattended minors being on the roof and, potentially falling off, jumping off, doing bad stuff. So I'd hate to put some big, crazy, kind of barrier along the edges there, but I really do have some concerns about safety of especially unattended minors on the roof that may have safety issues. So I'm sure smarter brains than myself and your architect and whoever can figure out a classy way to sort of make sure children are safe up there. I know they shouldn't be up there on their own anyways, but the last thing I'd want to happen is have a kid fall off or something, dangerous like that. So I'm sure there's probably some minimum safety standards we need to meet anyways, but if you could maybe go above and beyond and do your best to kid-proof, and I know you can never kid-proof anything because kids are creative, but I do have a little teeny bit of heartburn there as a parent with young adventurous children. So if that can be incorporated into the rooftop design in a classy way, that would be great. So all in all, thanks again, staff, and thanks Planning Commission, and thanks Development Team. I think this is going to be a great project, and I appreciate all of the effort and heartburn. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Sullivan. Next, Councilmember Wiley.
Thank you also for the work to look at it again and bring some a new vision for this project. I think we do need affordable housing. We've talked a lot about that. I do have just a couple of comments. So in looking at the percentage of AMI, which was what I was kind of concerned with, I like to see the breakdown, like there's going to be 26 units at 80% and 67 units at 60%. And so the numbers that you presented earlier this evening, was that the same as in the staff report? I believe it was, but I just want to confirm that. But my question about those numbers is this. When you look at the number of different kinds of apartments, and I see like there were 21 studio apartments and 82 one-bedroom apartments, and then only 32 two-bedroom apartments. And I wondered if the two-bedroom apartments would be available to people at like the 30% or the 50%, or if the price would be just so that they would only really be available to those at 80%. Because you can have some families with 2 working people trying to make a go of it, and they can't, but they might. So I just want to make sure that that 2-bedroom could be available to someone who's scraping by and not someone who's at 80%. So I don't know if there's a regulation that it has to be, if there's any stipulation about that. So that's my question. And then the other comment is in this paperwork, and it was even talked about tonight, is the developers asking for a $3 million loan. It's a $3 million loan, and anytime I get a loan, it's a loan that has to be repaid. So one of the callers called in and talked about not showing why they need the 3 million. I want to know, what's the repayment plan? How is that 3 million going to be repaid? So those are my two questions.
Go ahead, Emily.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you for your questions regarding the loan and the income levels. And for the loan, the repayment terms are the same as the original Ddla, which was 1% interest to be paid back with residual receipts. So the project will pay all of its bills, so, you know, lights, maintenance, utilities, etc. And then we'll make a loan payment to the city of Vacaville. For the income limits, Mr. Cicerone, please let me know if I'm off base here. I do not have it in front of me, but I believe the 2-bedroom units do include 30% income level availability. I think all the studio and 1s and 2s all include 30% income levels.
This is John Cicerone. Emily, you're correct that the within each of the floor plans, the AMIs are spread proportionately. So at the 2-bedroom level, we have 7 allocated to 30%, 3 to 50. The bulk is 15 at 60, and then a small number 6 at 80.
Thank you very much. That makes me feel a lot better. So I wanted that information. So then if we use ARPA funds to start this $3 million loan, when it's paid back, does that then go back to something to be spent for ARPA?
Yes, Councilmember Wiley, initially until the end of the year 2026, the repayments would need to be used for ARPA eligible uses. After that time, there are no restrictions on those repayments.
So I wonder how much would be paid back by 26. But I see it in 26, but what if it doesn't start being built for 2 years? Is 26 still the year?
Yeah, the repayments would not begin until, you know, they were open and collecting rents. So to have the income to do so. I don't have a number between now and 2026 available, but I can certainly, we can come up with some assumptions and predict an amount for you.
All right, that's kind of odd. I don't know where 2026 came from, but it's kind of odd considering that it won't, I mean, this is already 2022 and it hasn't even been approved. So, all right, well, thank you.
Thank you for your comments. I'm going to go.
I'm sorry, Mayor, this is Aaron. Just real quickly, the 2026 deadline is established by the federal government with the deadlines for ARPA.
So, Councilmember Stockton.
Yes, thank you, Mayor, and great questions, everyone. So I want to confirm it will be paid back in full with interest in 2026, correct?
No, it's not. I'm sorry. Sorry for interrupting. I apologize. It would not be paid in full by 2026. Payments that are, it'll be paid over time. The payments that are made through the end of 2026 will need to be used for ARPA eligible uses.
Right.
After
I'm clear.
2026, not.
Yeah, but what's the term of the loan? I mean, is this like a 100-year loan? Is this a 50-year loan, 10-year loan? How long is it going to take to recuperate the $3 million in ARPA funds?
It's a 55-year loan term, 1% interest, with payments made annually based on revenues. So as revenues go up, the payments can go up. So it could be paid off earlier, but it does allow the loan repayment period to be 55 years.
Okay. I want to also thank the staff and thank the developer for taking all of our suggestions and bringing back a product that looks much better than what we first started with. My concerns are with the ARPA. What percentage of our ARPA funding would we be allocating to this project that we've been allotted?
This is Ken Matsumi, the finance director. So in total, we're going to get $12.6 million. And so this would be 3 million of that 12.6, assuming it gets approved this evening.
Okay, so roughly a quarter of that. And when are we, because we should be talking about budgeting for ARPA and what we're using. That's coming up soon, correct?
It's the next council meeting where we're going to be sharing the survey results.
Okay, is there a reason why? Because I do think, like, I like the project, and if this is the best use of that ARPA funds, then, and the council decides that, I would support them. But I also think that it is so crucial and important that we have input and feedback from the community about where they want that money spent, because this is a quarter of what we've been allotted, and there are a lot of businesses that are hurting. There are a lot of other people that have been affected with COVID, and I just want to make sure we're being good stewards of the taxpayer money and this ARPA funds that are there to help folks that have struggled through these difficult times. And so, is it possible? Because I do like the project. I don't want to like shoot it down or get rid of it. Is there a way that we could agendize this and give them enough time to meet all their all of their requirements and filing deadlines while revisiting this after we get that data back on ARPA?
This is Emily Cantu, and I know the first application for financing is due in 3 days. I would ask the developer what level of commitment is needed for that application.
This is John Cicerone. The first application is with the Cal HFA MIP program, and we have to show a balanced project. And if we don't get the 3 million, then we have a gap for which we don't have a solution. And we'd most likely lose in the Cal HFA competition. Doesn't mean we'd lose the project, that we could likely apply in 2023, but it's a ferocious competition for the affordable housing. And we expect that the allocations that we're after will most likely be used up in this first round. So though there are subsequent rounds in 2022, I think what we're really talking about would be waiting for the 2023 financing cycle.
Councilmember Stockton, I'm trying to hold my tongue, and I'm going to wait until Vice Mayor Roberts goes. But I've heard this over and over. Every time we bring it back, they're like, hey, if we don't do it today, we're going to lose funding. If we didn't do this special called meeting last time, we're going to lose funding. I've heard that over and over, and you call wolf, too many times, and it's just disappointing. So, but I'm going to let you go back on. Councilmember Stockton, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think I've said my piece. My concern is I like the project. I think it's needed. There's no question that this type of housing is needed, and I appreciate them taking all that into account. But I also think that it's important that we have all the information that we need, especially from the public regarding where they want this money or where it can be best utilized. And unfortunately, we don't have that today. So I'm not sure what everyone else thinks, but I am interested to hear what other folks do think on the council, because this is a big decision. It's a lot of money. It's a quarter of these ARPA funds. So thank you.
Thank you, sir. Vice Mayor Roberts, go ahead, sir.
Yeah, thank you. I'll just skip a lot of stuff that everybody else has already asked. I just want to follow up on something that Mike Silva brought up with the educator housing. Well, I know there's strict stipulations on how you can give preferential leasing to certain demographics, but as far as I'm aware, giving a preference point for a teacher is no different than giving a preference point for somebody that doesn't have vehicles, because it doesn't necessarily discriminate between the protected classes per the state and federal guidelines. So one thing I'd like to do is have like the city attorney work with the developer attorney to actually do a deep dive into that, because as far as I'm aware, it doesn't discriminate against any of the classes. And if we can give one preferential point to a teacher, maybe make it a 7-point based off your hypothetical score sheet, that would definitely help out the city of Vacaville and bringing more educators in the area. Because I know some people that have commuted as far as Manteca that were working in Vacaville. So that amount of money that they're spending on gas just to afford to live someplace way out of town to work here in the district is a bit absurd. So if we can find a way around that by maybe giving a slight preference to teacher, it'd be greatly appreciated, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great comment too. Councilmember Ritchie.
Thanks so much. I'll try not to repeat anything. It's been a long topic. I just, a good thing about still being in the office, I was able to do quick contemplations on the answers, Councilman Stockton's questions. Yeah, to be good stewards of the community's money is important. If they're going to actually start leasing in 2025, start 2 years of building at $3 million at 1%, I wish I could get that loan for myself. They'll pay back $2,500 a month in principal. So in 1 year of leasing, when it comes due by ARPA, they'll be down 30 G's out of $3 million. So this is a great gift to them. I understand how financing works maybe too well, but I wish they could at least find some other opportunities to meet the desires and goals that Silva and everyone outlaid very well about more amenities to the building. Find a way to run multiple fire pits to the roof. I mean, the thought that you guys were going to have people carrying charcoal around the aisles, put hot coal on top of the roof, I think that would be a problem. That was a little short-sighted. I mean, you guys are getting a great deal at 1%. With inflation, I mean, we're losing money, they're giving you money. So it's a big deal. So find a way to make that happen. Fire pits on the roof, wherever we need it, amenities, make it a great place to live. I mean, it's $3 million at 1%. You can find a way to kind of make some motivating factors help us out. That's really it. I just wanted to kind of touch and base on that and the rooftop and try to make it go forward in this transaction.
Thank you, Councilmember. Back to Councilmember Wiley, I believe. Yes, go ahead.
Yes, I just wanted to respond also to Councilmember Stockton. He had asked about getting feedback from the people, and I really totally agree with that. I just wanted to give a little input that in the last couple of weeks, I've been on a few housing meetings with the public through the county and in the city of Vacaville, and affordable housing always ranks up high. So I do feel like there wouldn't be a lot of people arguing for affordable housing based on that input. So I just wanted to say that.
Thank you. I do believe we have a bunch of hands that went back up again.
Yeah, one comment, sorry.
Oh, did you have more? I'm sorry, Richie.
Yeah, so for the developers, it's John Cicerone. I'm very familiar with California Housing Finance Authority in Sacramento. They do have the bond programs you guys are going after on the commercial side. They do have carve-outs in the California bond programs for teachers and educators where they can be non-repayable bonds for certain type of transactions. So I know very well the fair housing that you guys are dealing with, and there is a problem. But the point system there is job types that could fit besides with the IRS code besides artists. They do have a way that they found to have educators and have public safety and public safety officers and educators have non-repayable bonds that are through the CRA. So they already are working at CalHAPA. We just got to really dig in, figure out how they got it to work. But if you're an educator and you are a public safety member, you do get debt forgiven bonds in California. So it's available. We've got to kind of figure out how to make it work with this project. So there's ways to tie that in to some kind of preferential treatment. They're doing it at the state level in some way or shape or form. So we got to figure out how they got it done and kind of implement it here too.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go back to Councilmember Silva. Sir?
Yeah, thank you. I think, so my other conversation that I had offline with staff was that different funding mechanisms can continue to be looked at. I want to echo Councilmember Jeanette Wiley's comments. I've been on a county talk, or local housing strategy talk, engaged different folks that within my district, just in general about housing. The only time I ever hear any issue about affordable housing is if it's going, quote unquote, in their area and they're not open to that. And typically that seems to be the one gap, which is predominantly in family housing. So far this council has approved 2 projects for senior housing. That's pretty cool. We have an opportunity today to honor both the voices of our constituents and the essential republic that we represent to vote on that behalf. So for me, I absolutely understand and agree that we should absolutely have feedback on how those funds are allocated. But to be honest, I think based on the different discussions we've had on this particular project, I'd even be comfortable talking about how do we use our general fund to make sure that if we can preference our residents or folks who are working and trying to make do, that they actually have somewhere to live that's their own. They can have their own space while they find a way to increase their revenue and go on and do their journey. So for me, I feel confident that workforce is worth it. And that's my feedback on that.
Councilmember Sullivan.
Yeah, I think, thank you, Mayor. I really appreciated Councilmember Stockton's comments. I hadn't really thought about the ARPA timeframe, and kind of now putting a little thought into that, that it is unfortunate timing, right? So next week's meeting, we talk about this. I mean, my first initial thought is that housing is our #1 strategic plan priority. It's the #1 topic anyone you talk to talks about. It's vitally needed. It's part of economic development. Councilmember Silva just made some points about how we should prioritize housing, and we've been talking about this housing plan, and we have no funding in the bank for housing. And so, I mean, for me, I don't necessarily care what color of dollar it is. I mean, it could be Measure M, it could be general fund, it could be, ARPA. So I think if my peers feel really strongly about ARPA, I don't have any heartburn about allowing staff the flexibility of kind of shifting funds around. We had a budget surplus this year, a sizable budget surplus. Measure M is coming in above projection as well. So I mean, this project's a game changer. It clears our arena numbers. Local families need this housing, and I think the project is finally to a place where I'm comfortable with the scope. I would have loved to see a labor agreement or living wages or prevailing wage, but that is what it is, and that's all part of the funding discussion as well. So I really do appreciate Councilmember Stockton bringing up the arena piece. I get his point. I think it's going to end up very strongly tilted toward housing anyways, but I also don't have a problem if we change the color of the dollar. I mean, it easily could be transposed to something else. I know Ken is probably having a slight heart attack right now when I'm saying that. But this is a game changer project for Vacaville, and I think we need to make it happen. So being respectful of their wishes, I don't have a strong preference, but I think we need this project. I'm pretty confident housing is going to come out top of the top in the ARPA discussion. That's exactly what's happening in my day job. That's exactly what's happening in Yolo County cities. Housing is crucial. And so I don't care how we do it. I think we need to do it, is I guess kind of what I'm saying.
Thank you. And seeing no other hands, I'll jump in. So when this project started, it was an exciting project. It was something that was going to sit in a spot that I thought was going to be great for Vacaville. And then I really felt like the developer just led us down this rabbit hole. And like I spoke before when Councilmember Stockton was speaking, it was like, if we don't do it right now, everything's dead. If we don't do it right now, everything's dead. And then we actually went into closed session and said, hey, we want to give you money. And they're like, no, we don't want the money. We want to go a different direction. We don't want prevailing wage. We can't do it if we do this. We can't do it if we do this. And I watched too many projects actually have labor standards. And I spoke deeply about this last time. If you're going to bring low-income housing and you're going to pay the worst amount of wages and benefits or no benefits at all, then all you're doing is doubling down and making it worse for people that are out there. So you're going to pay someone a wage or possibly no benefit to build something they can't even live in. In California alone, it's almost 50% of construction workers live on some subsidy. It's billions of dollars California pumps in to construction workers. So these developers, these for-profit developers can come in and make money. And now they're like, hey, we need $3 million and we'll pay you 55 years from now. And all these folks are going to come in from other areas, make no money, no wages, and they're not going to be able to afford the place that we're even building. And we don't even talk about that. We have so many other projects that are going on throughout just, let's say, Northern California that have some labor standards that are attached, and this company does not want to deal with any of that. And then they come to us and say, hey, we can't do any of these other projects. We can't do anything that Silva wants or that Sullivan wants. And then they're like, yeah, we could do a couple of things. And then we had to go to a special meeting, and then we don't go to the special meeting because now, I've lost a lot of trust with this developer, and I would love to have the trust back, and I would love to sit down with them again and try to figure out something. But we're going to give them $3 million for a for-profit company to come in and build something. And they couldn't be honest with us all the way through this process. And I would like to see a park there. I believe Councilmember Silva wanted a park there. I know that we can put some amenities, even small amenities in there, so we can have something that's viable for Vacaville. I believe Councilmember Silva even talked about, just simple pop outs on the walls. We're going to give you $3 million basically for free, and you're going to give us cookie cutter building. I believe it was Councilmember Stockton that talked about the ARPA funds. We have time. We can find out a quarter of our monies that are going to this project. Let's discuss it. I have no problem moving forward with this if the developer really wants to work with the city of Vacaville, but it's been fire, put out the fire, fire, put out the fire, fire, put out the fire. I know that Nolan and I used to sit on the 2x2. It's now the 3x3. And we had long discussions about bringing something like this just for teachers. Tonight they said, hey, we can give you this hypothetical, not that it will ever happen. It's just hypothetical. It should be concrete. What are they going to do? We're okaying all this stuff to move forward. And we're like, no, we could do this, but they're not held to that standard. And Nolan and I sat there and listened to a 2x2 meeting where they're doing it in other places where teachers do have the first bite at the apple, I'll say. But that hasn't been brought in. So I want a park or something that resembles something that would be a park for the folks that are moving in here. I want to see teachers have a priority. And then, just like we did with the veterans housing, if it doesn't go to a veteran, then it goes down the line. If a teacher couldn't qualify or if a teacher doesn't want it, then it goes down the line. It's not discriminatory. It just gives them the first crack at trying to get into that home. I want to hear about the ARPA funds. I want to see this come back. I've been disappointed. I don't want to be disappointed with this. I've been disappointed with this developer. I don't want to be disappointed with the developer, but I feel like the rug keeps being pulled out from underneath my feet. And I just want it to be an honest transaction and something that we can all work on. And now I see Vice Mayor Roberts. Go ahead, Vice Mayor Roberts.
Yes, sir. I just wanted to jump in with some of your concerns. I know about prevailing wage and making sure things are taken care of, as we've heard from the Carpenters Union about some previous issues that have been brought up with CFY. But a conversation with the city attorney earlier today, because ARPA funds are being used for this development, the Department of Treasury is requiring additional reporting requirements for how the wages are being used. And just a few of them that I pulled up is like, how will the recipient minimize risk of labor disputes and disruptions that would jeopardize the timeliness of the construction of the project? So there's a whole list of stuff that goes in conjunction if we approve ARPA funds for this. So kind of have a little bit more accountability for that money in the project itself.
And I appreciate that. My first comment would be this council has pushed for better things in Vacaville. This council has pushed you know, our developers to do better. And now we're like, hey, we'll give you $3 million and you can pay the lowest amount of money to construction workers coming in. So that is what's disappointing. And I've watched this council, you know, move and motivate people to get things that we want. And I feel like we're like, well, we kind of like this, so let's check it off. I think they can do better. I want them to do better. I'm saying let's make them do better. Councilmember Stockton.
Yes, thank you. The funding is my issue. Just the ARPA for me seems like, and I recognize the housing element. There's people that are behind on their rents and helping them get caught up. There's people that own businesses that, I mean, this project, if all goes well, is gonna break ground. I think they said in 2025, right? They'll start leasing, or 2024, they'll break ground. In 2025, they'll start leasing. I really think we should consider some of the funding, because a quarter of those funds could be used to make sure that we don't lose businesses that are going to be gone in a month or 6 months, or, you know, if we never get through this pandemic within the year. So I would be curious to know from Ken and from staff, what other funding mechanisms could be used to make up for this shortfall, because I do like the project. I do like what they've come up with, but I'm just nervous about losing a business or a legacy business, or people that are struggling now, not getting the help that they need. So that's my only hang up. And I would like to know from staff if there are contingencies other than ARPA to get this project, to make this project happen, since we're not going to get the ARPA information until our next council meeting.
Mr. Mayor, this is the city manager. So if you'd like, I can respond to that.
Sure, go ahead, sir.
Okay, so a couple of things. So with regards to the proposal before you tonight, again, we suggested the use of the ARPA funding because of the timeline needed for getting the application in. And as I understand, this Friday for the additional tax credit financing. And as I understand from the developer, the intent of getting that particular round of financing is so that we can go ahead and I say we, the developer, can go ahead and proceed with moving forward with the project, getting it under construction and completing by next year, so that we can continue to receive the 1.9 million from STA that was allocated for this particular project. With regards to alternatives, there are some potential alternatives that if we needed to, we could explore the possibility. And I know that sounds not very concrete, but there are other projects that we've presented to the council recently that will have a buyback clause, if you will, from their purchasing their affordability. And so there's a potential of, you know, over $1 million or so that might be available for use on this project. What that does do, though, is you know, take those funds away from future affordable housing projects. And so I agree the timing is a bit challenging right now, but that's where we find ourselves. But there are potential other options. And so if the council is interested in moving forward, we could, you know, provide some alternative language for the fiscal piece to give the council some opportunities to have a bigger discussion about the ARPA discussion at your next meeting on February 22nd.
Okay, Councilmember Sullivan has his hand back up. Go ahead, sir.
Mayor, I think I'm ready to make a motion.
We have multiple hands still up, so let me do comments. Councilmember Silva.
Just real quick, for the council to consider, part of the reason why my understanding, the reason why the 3 million increase, one of the predominantly reasons was because we requested a lower, you know, a better parking ratio and less floors. So to maybe if there's concern about the amount, then we can actually increase the floors. However that would work, 1 floor per quote unquote tower. It would reduce the parking lots though. So just throwing it out there if the concern, I don't know how much that would alter the allotment number, but that's another consideration. But I'm comfortable with what it is, and I absolutely respect what the mayor's comments are, and the rest of my council members' comments have been.
Great, Councilmember Wiley.
All right, a while ago when the developer was speaking, he was talking about the ferocious competition for this funding and what the, as you mentioned, the speed we need to do it, by next Friday or whatever the date was. So I just wonder, what if we say, yes, we will do the 3 million, but then if he fails to secure that money that he's going after, then does he come back to us or not?
So this is Emily Cantu, and the way the agreement is currently written, it allows time for the developer to seek other financing. So they wouldn't come back, they would seek other financing sources to replace the one that wasn't funded, which they're trying to obtain on Friday to keep us on track to keep the 1.9 million Solano Transportation Authority funds.
All right, so then we will know after this Friday whether or not they're successful in getting that?
I don't know the award announcement dates, Mr. Cicerone.
Emily, thank you. The Cal HFA awards will probably be made somewhere in the 30 to 60 days after the application deadline in February. And then there's a second round of financing with SDLAC and tax credit after that. So I would suggest that when the Cal HFA awards come out would be our best indication as to whether or not this will move forward in 2022.
Is there a possibility that this project would qualify for both awards? You got it this Friday and you're going to apply for the next one and that's reduce the $3 million?
It wouldn't reduce the 3 million, but if we win the Cal HFA, we will be assured the SDLAC bonds. So we view the Cal HFA MIP application as the most important and the most difficult to win.
All right, thanks.
Vice Mayor Roberts.
Ask a question based off what was just brought up. So in the event that they do not get this funding that they're applying for on the 11th, is there a defined time window for when we just say, hey, if you don't secure financing within this window, we can just search around for another project?
This is Emily again. Yes, there is. One moment, please. I'm sorry for the delay. I do want to say it's 24 months. If I remember correctly. I'm sorry for the delay. I'm looking for the exhibit in the Ddla. There we go. So they have until February of 2023 to obtain financing and purchase the property for the project.
Thank you.
Okay, so before I take Councilmember Sullivan's, I'm just going to say that, without saying I don't want the project, I absolutely want the project. I think we could do better, and I think they would be willing to do better if we held their feet to the fire. So if we can hold this off and let them come back and give us I guess maybe their last best and final. I know that this developer can do better. I know they're for profit and I know that they have to make their mark, but we're giving them $3 million of taxpayers' money. And I think we could do better. So with that, I'll entertain motion from Councilmember Sullivan.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to make a motion to approve the staff's recommendation as stated in the agenda with the caveat that they bring back possible supplementary financing options to kind of swap out some of the ARPA dollars. So city manager mentioned a possible $1 million infusion. You know, maybe we can consider general fund or Measure M. It doesn't need to happen tonight. I mean, we can do a swap at a later date. So I'd like to move the motion as stated with instruction to staff to bring back some financing ideas on alternate sources.
Robert, I'll second.
And like to make a friendly amendment, which is if it passes, that we look into prioritizing educators and staff, educator staff.
Accepted.
So we're going to pass something and then hope that we can bring it back. Okay, fair enough. That's a motion in a second. We'll go roll call.
Vice Mayor Roberts,
Yes.
Councilmember Stockton,
I just can't without knowing what the public wants, so I'm a no. But I like the project.
Councilmember Ritchie,
Yes.
Councilmember Silva,
Yes.
Councilmember Sullivan,
Yes.
Councilmember Wiley,
Yes.
Mayor Roulette.
No. We'll move on to the next item. Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council. This next item is a consideration for options of enforcement for the use of illegal fireworks within the city limits. Chris Concepcion, our fire chief, and Jill Childers are available for making a presentation.
Good evening, Mayor, Vice Mayor, council members. Chris Concepcion, the fire chief. I'm here in the room with our fire marshal, Jill Childers, and I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to her.
Good evening, Mayor, Vice Mayor, and members of the City Council. Tonight I'm here for your consideration of options for enforcing the use of fireworks within the city limits. Next slide, please. The use of fireworks of any type, including safe and sane, has been illegal in the city of Vacaville for many years. Next slide, please. Despite police and fire's coordinated efforts, the use of fireworks has continued to grow in popularity. The notable days of use are before, during, and after the 4th of July and New Year's Eve holidays. On July 4th, 2021, dispatch received 167 calls for service related to fireworks. Next slide, please. At the direction of City Council, staff is here tonight to present possible options for the enforcement of fireworks. Next slide, please. This is why this is important. As most of you know, the risk of wildland fire in Vacaville is extremely high starting in early spring. In the month of July, the risk is even higher due to our typical low humidity and strong winds. Our city is also surrounded by hillsides and open space, making fireworks even more of a concern. Next slide, please. Our goal is to reduce the negative impacts of illegal fireworks in our community. We believe these options can help us achieve this goal. Next slide, please. Current enforcement efforts. A couple of months prior to the 4th of July holiday, city staff, including police, fire, public works, parks and rec, and the public relations office meet to discuss the fireworks enforcement plan for that year. We determine when to start our public outreach program. That includes banners, yard signs, hand-delivered educational materials, social media posts, and articles that remind residents that fireworks are illegal in the city of Vacaville. This typically begins 30 days prior to the holiday. We also determine what extra staffing is needed depending on when the holiday falls. Next slide, please. We define police and fire roles for enforcement using patrol and FIPL personnel. The city's park ranger patrols Lagoon Valley. Code enforcement staff are placed at the end of Butcher Road to remind residents that the park closes early on the 4th of July and to make sure people do not try to access the park after dark. We prepare a plan for the collection of fireworks that are confiscated, and where we will store the fireworks until they can be disposed of. Next slide, please. Our current ordinance prohibits the use of fireworks within the city of Vacaville. VMC 1.28.120B gives PD and fire staff the ability to cite people on the spot for violating our ordinance. Staff must witness who discharged the fireworks and cite that specific person. Determining who is responsible is very difficult, especially when there are a lot of people around, and is even more difficult when fireworks are discharged from backyards. Next slide, please. Current infraction citation amounts are set for VMC 1.28.120B. First is $100, second citation is $500, and a third or any citation after that is $1,000 each. Next slide, please. Possible new enforcement methods. After some research, staff found that some jurisdictions are using a social host ordinance to aid in the enforcement of illegal fireworks. We currently have a social ordinance, VMC section 9.61. This ordinance focuses on underage drinking at parties. We could modify this ordinance to include illegal fireworks. As this ordinance is currently written, a fine of $1,000 in addition to recovery of costs related to the response can be charged to the property owner. Next slide, please. Currently, the police department has the authority to enforce the social host ordinance. Should council decide on this option, we would need to give fire personnel and code enforcement staff the ability to issue citations for illegal fireworks. Next slide, please. Other jurisdictions have created a new illegal fireworks ordinance. These jurisdictions refer to these ordinances as social host liability ordinance. These ordinances allow staff to witness the discharge of fireworks from a distance. Staff can take video or photos of the violation occurring for the documentation. A citation can be given on the spot, or it can be mailed to the property owner or person responsible for the property or the host of the gathering on private or public property. And we will use Health and Safety Code 12700 as a resource for fines. Next slide, please. Per the Health and Safety Code, fines cannot exceed $1,000. The city can determine our fines within these parameters. We can review the legal possibility of cost recovery for any type of city response. And a person found to be in violation of this ordinance will also be given the opportunity to appeal this violation. Next slide, please. Here is an overall review of the options we presented tonight. Under our current ordinance, VMC 15.20.271.040Q, it's already established. We must witness who discharged the fireworks and cite that person. Citing on the spot could create conflict in the middle of gatherings. The host of the gathering or the property owners or the runner is not responsible, and we are not able to charge for cost recovery for this response. If we amend VMC 9.61, the social host ordinance, it's already established. The current focus is underage drinking. We would need to add language and definitions to include fireworks. This is possible, but it would make the ordinance long and difficult to follow. The administrative fine is set at $1,000. Citations can be issued in person or via mail, depending on the situation. We can witness where fireworks are being discharged from and not focus on finding the specific person. We can charge for public safety response. The appeals process is already established, and we would need to add language to give enforcement authority to fire and code enforcement. If we create a new ordinance, we would need to create it. We can set administrative fines up to $1,000 per the Health and Safety Code. Citations can be issued in person or via mail, depending on the situation. We can witness where fireworks are being discharged from and not focus on finding the specific person. We can review information to determine if we can charge for our response. We can create an appeals process, and we would need to give authority to cite for violations to police, fire, and code enforcement staff. Next slide, please. Based on the options we have reviewed this evening, staff recommends creating a new ordinance. We believe that a new ordinance gives our department more options when it comes to enforcement in the field. We can decide on the method of enforcement based on the situation we are presented when responding to a call about fireworks. Please provide staff direction on the method of enforcement that council would like staff to explore and bring back to council for further consideration. Next slide, please. There is no physical impact for this, and the strategic plan and goal and initiative is strategic goal number 1 to ensure public safety. Next slide, please. We are now open to questions or comments.
Mayor, you might be muted.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Anybody? Well, we have a bunch, so let's go to public comment and knock that out first.
Thank you, and thank you, Councilmember Sullivan, but I had no option to unmute at that time. I heard you call me, but anyway, good evening again, it's Marion Elkins. I urge you, I implore you, any other adjective that means the same, to please do the best you can to mitigate this. I am tired of listening to fireworks that, in my perspective, go on all year long. They may not all over town, but in my area, they really go off on New Year's Eve, but then they continue. It's like one night, and 2 nights later there's 3, and 2 nights later there's 1, and 2 nights later there's 10. You know, whoever this person is really obnoxious, and it scares me to death because I worry about fire. Scares my pets, scares my friends who have babies, scares vets who have PTSD. So I would argue it's not only public safety, it's quality of life. I know it's going to be hard to catch them because when I call in, they ask me, do I know where it's coming from? And it's like, no, of course not. I can see it in the sky. It could be any number of houses, you know, but this is a start. Please, please, please pass this ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I see no other callers, so I'm going to bring it back to my council. We'll start with Councilmember Stockton. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you. There's no doubt that with the amount of wildfires and things that have happened through to Vacaville that we need to do something. My concern with this is, I mean, I'm in law enforcement. What kind of case law is there to issue citations to a homeowner for fireworks if you can't identify the person that's actually doing it, you know, in the backyard? Is there case law? Are there other cities that have already litigated this?
So I can't speak for case law, but I can tell you that we actually have looked at many other jurisdictions, and they've actually been using these type of ordinances for the last 2 or 3 years. And they've actually seen a decrease in the amount of fireworks being used around in those cities. So as far as citations, it goes back to similar to what we do for code enforcement, is that the property owner is always ultimately responsible for their property. So if staff can determine exactly what property those fireworks are being discharged from, then we can go after that property owner. And
so this is,
go ahead.
I'm sorry. So this is a civil matter. This is not a criminal matter. This is a civil matter.
Yes. Again, it does determine. There is some law, if you have over 25 pounds of fireworks and things like that, it can change into a different situation, but yes.
Okay, and could you briefly go over, you touched on the appeal process. Could you briefly just go over what that looks like?
I would stick to what we already kind of do in 1.28, which is if someone has a concern and they want to appeal it, they write it down, they document that they want to appeal the violation. It's submitted to the fire chief. The fire chief would then go ahead and review it. We would work with legal, and typically with the code enforcement cases, we bring in an outside hearing officer, and we provide documentation from the city's perspective on this is what we found and here is our proof. And then the person who is appealing the violation would do the same on their own behalf. And then that outside hearing officer would make the determination.
Okay, and then would the code enforcement officer, firefighter, or police officer that observed the infraction or observed the civil violation, would they testify?
I believe they could testify or do a declaration. Is that correct, David? Are you on?
Written.
David Nam, are you on? Okay.
Hi, this is Melinda Stewart, City Attorney. So that is correct. Either they could present oral testimony, or in many cases we do provide a sworn declaration.
Okay, and if they're unhappy with the hearing, the civil hearing, would they be able to take this anywhere else, or how would that work?
The hearing officer's decision is a final decision, and their next option would be to challenge it in court, Superior Court.
Okay, and then the city would utilize like a lien process or something if they refuse to pay the fine?
It would go, and Melinda, please correct me if I'm wrong, the citations and the fines and whatnot, we actually, from what I understand, cannot lien for, but it would go to collections, I believe.
Okay, thank you for answering all those questions. My last question is, if there is a neighbor that wants to be a reporting party that observes their neighbor that they know doing it, do they have the ability to file criminal charges or enforce this ordinance by like a citizen's arrest type deal? Is there a process for that?
I do not know the answer to that. I would have to follow up with the police department and ask them that. I know currently with the way the ordinance is written and how citations can occur, if someone wants to be a witness, from what I understand, they can actually sign a citation. But as far as what type of charges they could charge, I can't answer that.
Okay, and how's this going to work at like an apartment complex? Who's responsible for fireworks at an apartment complex?
It would be the property owner as well.
Okay, and would each firework be a separate violation, a separate $1,000 fine? How would that work?
I mean, we would get direction from you guys on how you would want to handle that, but yes, I could see us citing for each separate occurrence.
Okay, that's all my questions. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, we will go to Councilmember Sullivan.
Thank you, Mayor. So first and foremost, just a huge thank you. I never thought I would be this excited by an item like this. This has been a tremendous issue in my district, super disruptive, super scary, and very dangerous. And, you know, until seeing your presentation, Jill, I didn't really realize the complexity in the problem. I just thought, call Jill or call the police and they'll fix it. But, there clearly is a lot more nuance to this, and obviously catching people in the act is very difficult. The second, I want to second all of Ms. Elkins' comments. Ms. Elkins, yes, everything you said and all the adjectives, I 1,000,000% agree with you. The third, my comments on the actual process, I think staff's recommendation is great. I think the new ordinance would be fine. I like that you shared with us the underage drinking. It really made it make sense in my head how that would work. So thank you for using that as an example. I think the one thing I would like to request as part of the process is that we really go overboard on the signage and the warnings. I know I saw a couple of them this year, but really put out there $1,000 fine, get all over social media. We have some big cardboard prints all over the place. Maybe we have Emily reach out to high density housing complexes, because that's where a lot of the issues are at in this part of town, especially letting the landlords and property owners know they could be facing a $1,000 fine. My next comment is maybe like a sort of grace period, I guess, through maybe July of this year through New Year's, just to start. So maybe you start off with a $100 fine just this first 6-month period of time, just because it is a pretty big change. And $1,000 for, some folks could be pretty detrimental, but I don't mind hitting folks with a $100 fee and saying, hey, second time, you're getting $1,000, or past, January 1st, 2023, it goes to $1,000, but maybe some sort of grace period just to ease in while we kind of get into the process. But I love the idea. Thank you so much for the hard work. I didn't realize the complexity of the issue. I'm very supportive of staff's proposal, maybe with a couple additions.
Okay. Vice Mayor Roberts. I don't know why your hands, council member, I'm sorry, Silva. Oh, I do see your hand. I apologize. Vice Mayor Roberts, go ahead, sir. I apologize.
That's a question. Yeah, with all the fires, I know a few years ago we had the fire out behind CMF due to fireworks. Is there any way to do a higher administrative fine for immediate fire danger for areas such as behind my neighborhood where we got evacuated for a wildfire? Like if it backs up to a grass field or an empty lot, is there any additional fines in those particular areas that can be imposed?
Based on talking with David Nam, from what I understand is the highest we can go based on the health and safety code is $1,000 for a citation. We actually can't go any higher than that.
Okay, and with the response recovery fines that you're paying for it, so if they catch a field on fire, they'd be on the hook for all the response for the firefighters and engines that are called out to respond to that fire?
Yeah, this is the Fire Chief, Chris Concepcion. Yes, as far as cost recovery, it would be cost recovery of any response associated with putting out that fire.
Okay. Can I ask something real quick, Vice Mayor? Chief, wouldn't that go right now without even doing this? If we catch somebody starting something on fire, we still go after them, right? If we saw somebody today put fireworks in the middle of the field and the field caught on fire, we still have that ability. Not even talking about tonight, or am I wrong?
Yeah, if we can prove negligence on the part of a person that has started a fire on, and then yes, absolutely, we can do cost recovery.
Okay, I'm sorry, Vice Mayor, go ahead.
That's all I had, sir.
Okay, I do see Councilmember Silva. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mayor. Quick feedback. Yes, I totally agree. Ample signage and warnings. Not so sure about the grace period. Site for occurrence. I want to be treated like overdraft fees. And communicating with high density apartment management. Hopefully they can help get the word out. Main thing is any financial penalties that were generated from this, if we can allocate that, not to supplement youth services programs, but to add in addition to youth services programs. And that's all. Thanks.
Councilman Silva, can you repeat your comment about the grace period? We didn't quite catch.
Oh, I said I'm not so sure about the grace period, but I know this is going to come back. So,
okay.
If we do it, we just go with it. But the last point was just that the funds that are generated from any financial penalty that be allocated to further enrich our youth services program, not to supplement. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Councilmember Wiley.
I thank you very much for this information, and I really feel like we need to follow through with this, so I totally support it. I was surprised this year there were a lot of signs before the 4th of July. I saw those, and I don't know exactly what they said, but no tolerance, or it's against the law, it's illegal. And then it just felt like there wasn't any follow-up because there were so many fireworks going off, and it is hard to get the people that are doing it after the fact. So, and I talked to people who were frustrated in the neighborhood saying, why isn't anything being done? So I think if we, double up on the education and follow through, because then we would have the ordinance for them, it would really help reduce the incidents. I don't think we would eliminate it, but I think it would help to reduce it. So I'm in favor, and thank you for your work on this.
Hey, Councilmember Sullivan.
One more quick comment that was kind of spurned by a comment Councilmember Wiley had. we did get a ton of calls on this, a ton of emails, a lot of responses from neighbors that were very upset about this issue. What would be great in the policy also is like some instructions for residents on how to report the issue, or like if they should take a video or a camera, just something to help council that we can hand out as we get 30 of these calls. Like, here's how you report it. Here's how you can report your, and I'm not trying to encourage people to like, go after their neighbors or whatever, but this drove, dozens of calls and dozens of emails. So instructions to the public on how to report incidences with like best practices, if you have a video or a Ring camera or whatever, that would be helpful that we can share with the public as these complaints are coming in as well.
Councilmember Ritchie.
Nolan just actually spoke to that and says, I would like to find a way to make sure that everyone's educated, understands the process, all procedure to support this, find a way to address the multifamilies. That's gonna be really hard. Like whack-a-mole, try to find the person that's lighting the parking lot and they run back inside. Like I was that kid at some point. So it's gonna be hard to find the people that are doing that in multifamily projects. But I actually wanted to grab the mic to motion to approve this hopefully with some considerations for signage and education. But I think this is a great thing.
Hey, we do have one more comment, and then I was going to comment too, but I do have Vice Mayor Roberts. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, one additional thing to follow up on is there any steps that can be taken for repeat offenders? Like some people just want to say, hey, I'll eat the cost of the fine to have fireworks at my house. Like every year they just keep setting off fireworks regardless of being fined. Is there additional steps you can take, like public nuisance or knowingly or causing a fire hazard or endangerment?
We can definitely research that, sir, and find out if there's anything else that we can do. We're somewhat limited by what state law allows us to do. We at first, and I had thoughts that there were some jurisdictions that actually charge higher fines, and we were advised that we're limited by state law as far as the fines that we can charge, and so we will definitely follow up on that and research it for you.
Is there any fines that the fire department can do in terms of intentional fire hazards?
I'm sorry, one more time.
Is there any type of fines that the public safety can do for like intentional hazards or unintentional or potential damage they can cause? Like if somebody has a distinct fire hazard outside, maybe part of the mitigation aspect of it.
Well, I'm not quite clear on your question, but I mean, I think from our weed abatement program addresses that as far as fire hazards, and that's what that program tries to do, is to reduce the fire hazards throughout the city by making sure any fire hazards in the form of weeds and high brush are cleared on an annual basis. And if they don't, they're fined as a result of it.
Yes, so sorry, I wasn't very clear. It's like the people are intentionally setting off fireworks every year, regardless of being fined. If at that point it becomes a known fire hazard, possibly something to look into for, recurring offenders that don't care about being fined.
Okay, well, we'll follow up on that for you.
Research it, yeah.
Okay, so and I believe it's going to pass, but and I do believe it's an issue. I've heard from citizens, but if I had to talk to a dispatcher, which I have, tons of calls come in. It's illegal right now. I feel like the first thing we're going to do is put fines on folks. People aren't going to respond because we have limited staff. We can't be everywhere. And then people are going to be mad at us because we still didn't do anything. And then we're going to find someone that possibly won't have money. We might have to come back and figure out how these folks pay. I just feel like it's a good idea. And we're just like, hey, if we find people, then it's going to stop. And I just disagree. It's illegal. I think the chief has done a fantastic job trying to get just public awareness that you shouldn't do fireworks in Vacaville. It's been illegal for a long time. It just, I get the concept. I'm not going to be naive and say, okay, this is going to solve it. I think even Councilmember Wiley said, oh, maybe a few people won't do it, but we'll have 3,000 other folks doing it. So I don't know. Maybe it's just ceremonial. Like, oh yeah, well, we tried. So that's all. I'm going to vote no. I don't know what we can do to fix it, but I don't think just becoming the guy that comes around and says $1,000 on you, and possibly having more police called out because now we have the vigilantes out there, you know, trying to stop people from doing fireworks. I think we might be opening Pandora's box, but I'll entertain motion. In fact, I think we already had motion from Councilmember Ritchie. I'll entertain a second.
Mr. Mayor, this is just an informational item, so.
Oh, okay.
There is actually no action to be taken tonight. We simply were looking for direction on options. And so with that, I will defer to our folks in the fire department to make sure that we've captured everything that has been said tonight.
Hold on, I do have Councilmember Silva.
Just to echo Mayor's comments, I'm curious to know when this comes back, if staff can look into situations where this where it kind of backfired or didn't work, and how did cities have to work around that as well. If there's any case studies out there for that.
Yes, sir. We will talk to more jurisdictions before we bring this back. We have not found any specific data. You know, these social host ordinances are a pretty new thing as far as fireworks are concerned. So we have not been able to find any hard data as far as it's reduced firework use by such a percentage, or, you know, it's resulted in this specific dollar amount as far as fines are concerned. We'll try to find some of that data, and definitely when we bring back the proposed ordinance, that you folks will have more of that information for you. And I think we captured all of your comments. I know Jill has been writing furiously here. I believe we caught all of your comments.
Actually, now we have another hand up. Councilmember Sullivan.
Thanks, Mayor. Appreciate it. Sorry, conversely to that, you know, Jill mentioned anecdotally that some cities had reported they did see a decrease in issues, or you know, that it was working. I know when we were talking about cannabis a while back, there was this urban myth that cannabis increases crime rates, but there's no data points that prove that is true or prove it's not true. So we had the chief sort of anecdotally ask other police chiefs in the areas, you know, what has been your experience? Did you see, you know, so even if we can't collect data, chief, if we can anecdotally query code enforcement or fire departments of cities that have this ordinance and just, you know, is it good or bad? You know, so not just the bad outcomes or the unintended consequences, but anecdotally, was it a good idea for them, and did it reduce the calls for, or reduce the incidence of illegal fireworks?
Absolutely, we will do that.
Okay, thank you, council. Next item.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council. This next item is another informational item. It is a presentation to the council as part of our educational series. This particular one is on traffic calming and congestion mitigation. We understand that there's a lot of issues related to this subject that occurs in citywide, but we know that as new council members and prior existing council members, that this is a very common topic that your constituents raise to you throughout the course of your terms. And so what we were hoping to do tonight is walk you through some of the typical things that we see and experience in traffic engineering department or division of our public works department. And so tonight our interim director of public works, Ray Leftwich, is here to walk you through an update kind of at a 30,000 foot level. I recognize that there's probably some very specific examples in each of your respective districts that, you know, we can talk about at a future date, but tonight is really intended to provide the council with an overview of this subject and get you more familiar with this process and how we can help work with our community to make improvements where we can. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Leftwich for his presentation.
All right, good evening, Mr. Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of City Council. I haven't had the pleasure of meeting many of you, so a quick moment to introduce myself. I'm a 27-year public works professional, have worked for multiple cities, and for the past 4 months, it has been my privilege to serve along the 120 or so professional and dedicated members of the Public Works Department that work tirelessly each day to serve the residents of Vacaville. This discussion is intended to provide a high-level overview of traffic calming and congestion mitigation. All traffic situations need to be evaluated based on the specifics of each case, and there is not a one-size-fits-all approach. There is no action item related to this presentation, and it is intended to be informative in nature. Next slide. All right. First part, traffic calming overview. So we got speed limits, and we'll discuss how they're established, traffic control devices, and the regulations to their implementation, collision types, because ultimately that's the biggest concern. Is it's important to understand the root causes of most of the collisions. The traffic calming toolbox is what I call it. Here, and it's not completely inclusive of every alternative, but here's some of the main tools that we see for using for utilization in traffic calming situations. We want to use the right tool for the job, just like you're not going to go use a hammer to change the oil in your car. And then programmatic approach. Public works people in general, we tend to be, we're system oriented, and creating a good program. It's a roadmap to success that creates the most efficient use of resources and will lead to the results of the most desirable outcome. Next slide. All right, speed limits. First of all, we got a bunch of rule books. So we have basic speed laws established in Chapter 7 of the California Vehicle Code. So this is our primary rule book. Within that, we do have some prima facie speeds. So we've got 15 miles an hour at railroad crossings, alleys, and intersections with limited visibilities, and 25 miles an hour in business districts, residential districts, and school zones. All other areas are established by an engineering study. And that engineering study is we do a speed survey, and we create what's sometimes referred to as the 85th percentile. Well, that's the speed that 85% of the drivers are going at or below. So you got basically 15% of the drivers are exceeding that. The purpose of this is to reduce conflicts between vehicles operating at different speeds. The speed limit is designed this is how people are actually driving. So you don't want some people are going 25 miles an hour, others going 45, because that creates conflict. And ultimately, when this was first developed, it was to eliminate speed traps, which is really a dated law that I don't think really applies anymore. But these are the current rules that we're under. Next slide. There will be some changes upcoming. Assembly Bill 43 was signed into law just this past October. It will change things, but it's not yet certain exactly how much. I think there's some people think that public agents, cities, and counties will be able to arbitrarily set speed limits, but that's not exactly true. It does not go into effect until June of 2024, so it gave it over 2.5 years. And the reason for this is so there's reviewing and developing of additional engineering standards and also for adjudication. What it will do is it's going to allow agencies to round down. So if we were to do the speed survey and right now the 89th or the 85th percentile came out, let's just say 39 miles an hour, per the current code, we round up to 40. With AB 43, you'll be able to round down to the next 5 mile an hour increment. There's also allowances for additional 5 mile an hour reductions for safety corridors and high concentration bicyclists and pedestrians, as well as establishment of 20 and 25 mile an hour prima facie speed limits for certain types of business districts. Next slide, please. Okay, traffic control devices. So we got the manual on uniform traffic control devices. This is our rule book on how and when to use pavement markings, signage, and striping. It's established by the United States Department of Transportation, and the purpose is to establish uniformity of traffic control devices across the nation. That way, you leave Vacaville, you drive through Sacramento, you drive into Nevada, you drive into Ohio. The way and manner in which traffic control devices should be fairly consistent and ultimately helps create a safer environment. It is intended to help reduce crashes and congestion, improve the efficiency of the surface transportation. So basically, we don't get arbitrarily place stop signs and other traffic control devices just where we decide we want to. We'll talk a little bit about some of the common themes. Stop signs, we get a lot of requests for stop signs, traffic signals, and also excessive use of signs. Next slide, please. So all-way stop sign control, or sometimes the four-way stop sign control. Here's some of the highlights. So first, it requires an engineering study, just like determining the speed limit. It requires an engineering study. Here are some of the things that the elements needed to meet the warrants for all-way stop control. One of them being 5 crashes within a 12-month period, which is probably a heck of a lot more than most people would expect. And then if you're doing it just based on traffic volumes, you have an average of 300 vehicles per hour for 8 hours on the major street of the intersection, and an average of 200 combined bike, ped, and vehicles on the minor street. So again, it's probably a lot more traffic than most people would guess. But those are the current regulations just for the all-way stop control within the MUTC. Next slide, please. Traffic signals, just much like stop signs, they have rules. So here's just a list of some of the warrants to be considered without going into all the details. 8-hour, 4-hour vehicle volumes, peak hour volumes, pedestrian volumes, school crossing, coordinated signal system. Again, it doesn't have to meet all of these, but these are the different situations and warrants looked at within the engineering study. And just, again, one of the things we always look at, what's it cost? Okay, well, traffic signal, and this would just be a fairly common traffic signal at the intersection of, say, a 4-lane arterial and a 2-lane collector, would be about $500,000, as opposed to, say, putting in stop signs and pavement markings for all-way stop control. We're probably talking about $2,000. So again, fairly significant difference. Next slide, please. So again, we also get, in addition, a lot of stop sign requests. You get a lot of other requests for various warning signs. Could be stop sign ahead, share the road with bicyclists type of signs, children ahead, those types of signs. But again, the MUTCD does provide additional guidance of excessive use of signs. We have all signs have their guidance for how they're to be used, but when used excessively, they do tend to lose their effectiveness. I kind of think of it as visual white noise. That white noise in the background, you don't hear it. Here, my public works director world, you work at the wastewater treatment plant, you actually stop smelling it. The same can be said if we overpopulate the roadway with signs. There's the possibility of people stop seeing the signs, and now they're not seeing the regulatory signs like the stop sign. So again, we always want to have thoughtful evaluation prior to implementation of any traffic control device. Next slide, please. Okay, again, like I said, the collision types, it's important to know what type of collisions are occurring, because ultimately that's the big concern. And I've reviewed thousands of traffic accident reports. Speeding and aggressive driving is by far number one. Impaired driving is extremely, unfortunately, very typical, as is distracted driving. We always know it as distracted driving because the first thing they tell the responding police officer is, I was not using my phone and I was not texting. And it says it right in the report. Then hit and run, and it's with no witnesses. And these are, it's probably a combination of the three above. And these are where, you know, somebody parked the car on the street in front of their house. They come out in the morning and got sideswiped sometimes during the night. Medical impairment is becoming fairly common, you know, not super common occurrence, but it is with our aging populations. And it can be anywhere from, I felt, dizzy or lightheaded to people having a stroke or a heart attack behind the wheel of the vehicle. And ultimately, and probably and it's the last one on the list, to be engineering controls. This would be like, you know, could we have had another sign or made it a four-way stop control? And often, most of the times I find when it's engineering controls, what's really happening is the engineering controls are there, it's just there's a tree limb now blocking the stop sign. So it was there, it was just me. Next slide, please. So we're going to open our traffic calming toolbox. And again, these are just a few, and of course, there were more types to be discussed. Speed humps and speed tables. Not called speed bumps. Speed bumps are those little plastic manufactured things that are in parking lots. You would never, ever consider sticking that on a road. Traffic circles and roundabouts. Roadway narrowing and visual identifiers. Next slide, please. But also just real quickly, just want to kind of touch on stop signs and traffic signals, because we do get a lot of requests for those for traffic calming. But even within the MUTCD, it specifically even says stop signs and traffic signals, stop signs and yield signs should not be used for speed control. Traffic signals are also not used for traffic calming and speed control. It's to coordinate and promote the free flow of traffic. Next slide, please. So speed humps and speed tables. So you see on the left would be a typical type of speed hump, and a speed table on the right. Again, the speed table is a lot longer, so it's a less abrupt change. There are some challenges with these, however. Just again, it's like everything else in our toolbox. Is it the right thing to use in that particular location? Again, Public Works, we get lots and lots of requests. One of the big challenges with them is they do create a reduced response time for emergency vehicles. Different studies, they tend to average somewhere around 6 seconds per speed hump or speed table. But you go, okay, well, it's only one, but it's really not, because when agencies have these, you tend to find they'll be, they kind of grow. And now, the fire truck on a response may have to go over multiple speed humps or speed tables in a response. So again, it's not just one; they have a compounding effect on response time. Costs for these could be anywhere from about $3,000 speed hump on the left to $15,000 each for the speed table on the right. Next slide, please. Okay, traffic circles and roundabouts. So the first thing is, and these can be challenging, especially applying them into existing conditions. These two are technically just traffic circles. They do not raise the criteria of being a roundabout. Roundabouts are much larger and do not require the same amount of slowing to enter. One of the challenges with them, and again, with everything we're designing these need to be able to accommodate the turning templates of the fire department's apparatus. And the cost of these can run anywhere from $100,000 to $500,000, depending on how intricate the designs are. Also, if we're doing them as a retrofit project, a lot of times now we're dealing with the existing curb returns, roadway widths, and moving around storm drain inlets and other utilities. Ultimately, these really work best in new developments where we're starting with a clean slate. Next slide, please. These are just a couple of examples of some called roadway narrowing. So it gives a visual. We didn't actually change the roadway width. by use of pavement stripings and edge striping, we can create a narrowing effect visually to the driver, which does have a corresponding reduction in speed. The one on the left, this is actually near an elementary school, and we have a whole lot of people parking on the street, especially back to school night or if there's other school events. And then the rest of the time, nobody's parking out there. When you have wide pavement, people will drive fast. Well, so what we did is we just threw down a stripe that would be basically that parking strip. And again, it tends to have that effect. On the, let's see, that was the one on the left. The one on the right, this was actually a combined Class 2 bicycle and neighborhood electric vehicle lane. It was going down a fairly busy commercial roadway corridor. Now, the standard only required it be a 4-inch stripe, but that's the minimum. You can make it bigger. And what we did on this one was we made it 12 inches wide. Again, it's just something that's visual to pop to grab the attention of the driver. And it seems to have had a beneficial effect. Next slide, please. Here's some other alternatives. Again, it's creating roadway narrowing using bulb outs. On the left is a bulb out at a curb return. One of the benefits of these is, especially when you're in a downtown or commercial area with a lot of pedestrians, and you get them on both sides of the street. Well, we're now actually pulling those two curb ramps closer together. That pedestrian is in the crosswalk less amount of time, as well as creating that visual narrowing for the driver. Now, some of the challenges to them are we can have some challenges. Got to make sure that the right turn templates work, so we're not having cars or trucks popping the curb. And they also, talk to the street sweeper operators. They'll complain about it because it's hard to get around them. And on a retrofit project, it can be tough dealing with drainage, so we don't have ponding water in the little corners. So this was a retrofit project. Actually, this was a retrofit project of a former state highway. So there was a lot of challenges in chasing grade and putting in additional drain inlets to make that work. On the right is just a mid-block bulb out for some plantings. First, there was going to be some trees there, but then the mural went in, and so okay, well now we just had small shrubs. The challenge out if you're using these, thinking of them through, a lot of times they can be put in locations where there's a fire hydrant, where there's no on-street parking anyway. And again, it's creating that visual buffer. Okay, next slide, please. And this last one, this is just a visual identifier. So that was just flat stamped asphalt in the middle of an intersection. Again, just something to grab the attention of the driver. So some of those can be done fairly easily, especially like striping and creating these visual identifications to grab the attention of the driver that, hey, you're approaching an intersection. Next slide, please. I want to talk a little bit about programmatic approach. Again, Public Works, we like master planning. Again, we have limited available resources, staff and funding. So staff, does perform evaluation analysis of concerns and complaints in addition to normal workload. So if anybody has an area of concern, please call Public Works, and we will dispatch our staff to go and do the evaluation. However, the best way, probably the most economically efficient and creates the best overall results, because what we do on one intersection, it does have corresponding effects on the surrounding areas, is master planning. And with master planning, then we can bring to, again, we have limited staffing available. It's hard to dedicate them to go create master plans. We bring in consultants, they can focus on that master plan. Then we can start identifying the funding and creating the implementation of that master plan over time. Grant funding is always a possibility, and we certainly do utilize that currently as much as we can. Recently, we're entered into the project for the streetlight cameras. So a project that Gwen Owens is working on. Speed hump and speed table policies. Again, if for cities that have them and you're going to do it in the best way so we don't end up with a hodgepodge of where they're at. And so again, it works programmatically as creating a policy for speed humps or speed tables. And then really, and it's not on here, but it kind of goes back to, where do you put in like the roundabouts, the traffic circles, and, those things that work best, or the bulb outs. And it's, that's the updating design criteria and improvement standards again for, that works. Those things can work really well in new development where we have a clean sheet of canvas of which to work. Next slide, please. Okay. There we go. Next major area is congestion mitigation. So we just talked about, okay, how are we dealing with people who are driving too fast? Okay, well now how are we dealing when there's too many cars and we're not driving fast enough? We'll talk a little bit about the cause of congestion, level of service, developer impact fees, the timing of improvements, and also grants. Next slide, please. So congestion and level of service. So we get incremental increases. A lot of it's due to development, obviously, but we also do get changes in transportation patterns. I'll just think back like when I was a kid. I can count on one hand the number of times my mom drove me to school. I see parents who live 6 blocks from the school get in the car to drive their children to school now. So we do have some cultural changes, and also the way that schools are utilized, where people are going across town to school and not as much just to the neighborhood school. That's just one example, but there are obviously others. Level of service is a combination of average travel speed and time waiting at traffic signals and stop signs. So ultimately, this is like a policy decision for the city of Vacaville and for any city. Typically, its model is no worse than level of service D. And again, there's a lot of criteria that would be a presentation on itself at the build out conditions. And level, again, like I just said, level of service is established by city policy. Used to be part of the CEQA analysis. It no longer is. Currently with CEQA, it's the vehicle miles traffic. So it's a completely different view. But again, the city policy can still evaluate and require mitigation at a level of service. Next slide, please. So impact fees, you're going to hear a lot more about this at the next city council meeting in 2 weeks. I'm going to go over this briefly. But again, development pays for its proportional share of impacts to transportation infrastructure projects, as well as other infrastructure as well. This is set by Assembly Bill 1600 and also referred to as the Mitigation Fee Act. So again, if we can't make the developer coming in now to fix the problem that already exists, we can only require that they mitigate or pay into the fund to mitigate their fair share of the impact. So we got the city traffic impact fee, and typically this is for like the larger roads, arterials, 4 lanes, or bigger bridges, signals, off ramps, those larger transportation elements. And that's to mitigate the citywide traffic impacts created by development. Current fee is $12,178 for a single family residential home. Depending on use, there's different fee structure, whether there's high density or various types of commercial, depending on what their impacts are. Within the city of Vacaville, we also pay into the regional traffic impact fee of the RTIF. That's through Solano Transportation Agency. We are within District 1, and one of the projects for that would be the Jepson Corridor. The current fee for the RTIF is $1,500 a month for a single family residential. Both the transportation impact fee and the RTIF are going through updates. And again, there will be more discussion about this in 2 weeks. Next slide, please. You know, one of the things in public works we often hear is like, well, why don't we make the developers widen the road or you know, do whatever the improvement is prior to development? Well, again, the challenge is, how's the money flow? Well, typically those impact fees are being paid at the time of building permit. In some cases, they get paid at the time of occupancy. But again, it's really not until the houses are being built, not ahead of time. There are some opportunities to include impact fees as conditions of development agreement in lieu of paying fees. So again, you have the developer building, putting in that traffic signal or widening the road or whatever it is as a condition of development agreement. But those tend to work a lot better when we have projects with a lot of units within the DA. So just think if we had 1,000 unit project, well, it's only going to have a little over $12 million. Sounds like a lot of money, but in roadway widening world or building an on-ramp or off-ramp, it's really not. And it becomes very challenging, especially with smaller projects, 100 units this year. It becomes challenging to how much you're going to be able to put onto the developer. And one alternative, just to put it out there, not that I would necessarily suggest it, but is municipal revenue bonds. But again, that's kind of a little bit of a gamble because it's relying on the general fund as a backstop for debt service if the transportation impact fee revenues are not sufficient. Next slide, please. And then lastly, we're looking at grants. So grant funding, it can often take several years from application to award. Projects that have completed design and CEQA or NEPA clearance have a better chance of receiving funding. So, if we could sometimes front loading projects with the preliminary engineering and environmental clearance work with local funds, gets those projects further up in the head of the line for federal funding. Good example of this, recently just had the press conference with Congressman Thompson and Garamendi about the I-505 Vacaville Parkway overcrossing and getting funding from the infrastructure bill because that project is further along on that front end work. It makes that project very desirable to the federal agencies to provide funds. Grants often require between 10 and 50% local match as well. So again, it's not, we're not getting money just to 100% funding. That's very rare. And grant funding is often competitive and it's certainly not unlimited. And one of the best benefits for use of grants is to help mitigate that delta. Because again, remember, we can only charge the developers their proportional share, but then you have these other little incremental changes causing congestion and helping the city to make that gap up. Next slide, please. So just in conclusion, the traffic calming. So traffic conditions do change over time. The signing speed limits of applying the use of traffic control devices are governed by adopted statutes and standards. Application of traffic control devices requires thoughtful consideration that includes incremental impacts to surrounding areas and available resources. And a programmatic approach provides the best opportunity to develop a systematic method to prioritize traffic calming needs within available resources. Next slide. And with regards to congestion mitigation, the city can only charge developers for their proportional share of increased traffic, and necessary funding for a project often trails development. And next slide, please. And with that, concluding my presentation, and I would be more than happy to answer any questions or comments.
Mr. Mayor? Okay, Mr. Vice Mayor?
I'm
you
here.
there? Okay. I know you
Yeah,
have troubles with your internet.
I am having some issues. We'll open it up to public comment. I see none. We'll go back to council. Councilmember Silva.
Thank you, Ray, for the presentation. I want to be brief as I can. So if there's, in the presentation, you mentioned about, accidents in certain areas. What threshold is there if there's cars ending up on people's lots? Is there a certain number of occurrences before we look into that?
There's not. I mean, if there's a concern, let us know. I mean, with as far as like the accidents, that was the criteria within for the stop sign warrant. But there's also other mitigations as well. I mean, if that type of situation occurs, please give us a call and we'll investigate.
Okay. So just to be, so everybody knows out there, so a lot of times those concerns have been raised. I know I've raised those since I've been on council. I know for decades around the Markham neighborhood, a lot of those concerns have been addressed, or at least arisen, the right term right now at this time of hour. But my question then is, what mechanism do we have for follow-up, or how long should residents expect to hear some type of follow-up?
Well, again, a lot of it goes back to what are the resources necessary to mitigate. In some cases, we've had some recently where some of the recommendations, it's $400,000. Okay, well now we're talking about budget and getting into the next budget cycle. And again, it's also adding it on to all the other projects and all the other work.
So in our policies, we don't have a defined time to at least acknowledge or respond back to our residents that have a safety concern about whatever that may be related to traffic.
We typically respond back almost immediately. Now that the answers may not be what they want. Often what people want, they want to see us going out, putting up the stop sign or putting up the signal or putting up the speed bump or whatever it is immediately. But that's just not practical. And again, it's going through we have to go through the process, especially if the mitigation measures can be quite expensive.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. I will say that I personally have been going through, I guess, what a council member's process would be. A lot of us are still waiting on hearing some specific feedback. So I think, so I guess for me, I'm trying to understand more about what policies that we as a council need to look into, and then and if there's any additional support that council needs to consider about how we communicate addressing different needs. Or maybe, let's say, for example, there's a certain spot and it has been looked upon, but a particular resource that folks can go to, including myself, to understand why nothing can be done at that particular time, or what is ongoing and what they're looking into to actually address that systemic issue. So I know it's not, maybe it's directly related to this topic, but another big topic that keeps coming up locally is lighting. There's a lot of regions throughout the city that there's just general concerns about adequate lighting in different areas. So I'm kind of, I don't want to get too far off of this particular topic, but I can't help but think that that's related to pedestrian safety and traffic. I'm hoping at one point, city manager can bring back at some point this year another informational presentation on lighting, on where we're at, or at least what our policies are at. We can start with that. Another area of concern is ADA access on curbs. For example, on Markham and Wesley, there's a gentleman that in his wheelchair has to come against traffic because there's no ADA access on Wesley and Markham. So he's driving along coming against traffic in order to access his apartments, or whatever his residence is along the west side of Markham Avenue. So in traffic, I'm also, so like it's these like little concerns that for me personally, a lot of residents get us really going. And that let alone, I know respect to a city manager wants to focus on this general approach, but you know, I need a date. The residents here, the constituents, they're looking for some type of response. So maybe city manager, when should I let them know to expect the work that's been done or suggestions that's been done around the Markham neighborhood area and the Berryessa Drive?
So that's something that the Public Works Department, Transportation Division has prepared a draft report. In terms of a neighborhood meeting on that, I'll have to coordinate with them and get back to you in terms of how to do that. And also working with you on the scope of what you're after in terms of communicating with the neighborhood. Well,
so what I'm looking for is just really what the experts, what our staff is, what we've identified as problems, what are quick fixes. You know, if we're looking at trying to implement a larger master plan, sure, but that's, you know, as it was indicated in this presentation, that's several years before we'll see any positive outcome. And I think what we're all concerned about as our communities grow, and people's behaviors aren't, you know, the best right now, and it's embarrassing to say that. It's embarrassing to see that. It's embarrassing to hear different situations. You know, I'm not trying to put it all on Public Works, but I'm really looking forward to seeing some creative ways, short-term and long-term, that City Council can consider on how to best mitigate some of these issues, systemically mitigate these issues short-term while we work at trying to address those bigger ticket items long-term. I'll let, I see Nolan's, in the 3x3 meeting, we had some further discussions, but I'll let my colleagues, I'm not sure if they're going to share that, but so I guess what I'm requesting, city manager, is to have that report for that area by the end of March available for at least public comment. That's my respective request. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Sullivan.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I appreciate it. I have some similar comments and concerns that Councilmember Silva brought up, and I'll talk about the 3x3 as well. I think, part of the issue is that as Vacaville has grown from, 70, 80,000 people to over 100,000 people, what's happened is we continue to build housing on the exteriors of town, and it puts a lot more pressure on the main thoroughfares. And so, Alamo, Peabody, Brown Street, you have all of these folks commuting now, or getting to the freeway through these existing residential neighborhoods, typically where there's schools or other kind of hazards. And honestly, it's sort of a nightmare. I think, with no school busing for the last 10 years or so too, the mornings and drop-offs in the afternoons are absolutely atrocious. And, I think dealing with traffic has probably been one of the more frustrating things that I've had to deal with while being on council. You get these complaints pretty frequently from the public, and then you kind of send it off to staff and it goes to a traffic engineer or somewhere. And it's sort of, and I don't mean this in a derogatory way, but almost kind of a black hole. You're going to get back pretty much the same response, which is, we've done a study, it doesn't meet standards, and sorry. But these residents have to drive this street every day, and they're stuck at an intersection for 15 minutes, or they've had near misses with, accidents, or pedestrians have almost been run over, or, clearly cars are going well past the speed limit. It's a really uncomfortable position to be in, because you're trying to advocate for these areas. And honestly, you're going to send people into kind of this bureaucratic mess and kind of not get resolution, or at least feedback or response. And I think Councilmember Silva is kind of expressing that fact now. I've had very similar experiences. And so, I kind of tell people, well, I'll send this over to to traffic, and, it's probably not much will happen. We'll do a study or something, and we'll do our best to get back to you. And unfortunately, that is a, pretty common occurrence over the last 4 years or so. So I do echo the councilman's comments about, we need a better process to get back to folks and kind of close the loop. And honestly, we need action in a couple areas. Brown Street is a problem. It's been a problem. We know it's a problem. You can go down there tomorrow morning and see that it's a problem. But repeatedly, we're told it's not. Most of the schools are a huge problem. Payton Elementary School, we had 2 kids die in front of the school, 7 years ago or so. It's an astronomical problem. Jepson Middle School is a nightmare from Orchard. And some of this is the school district's fault and purview and responsibility. And, part of what we're doing on the 3x3 is bringing up some collaborative ideas to work with the school district to target a couple key school sites really increase parking access and decrease some of these issues. And I think, we'll be bringing some of that back through the city manager. We're very excited about it. But I guess, as a councilman, it is very frustrating to deal with this topic because you almost feel sort of powerless. So one of the questions I have is, would it be possible to create some sort of FAQ page, maybe with a video of this presentation even, and explain kind of how the process works, explain the criteria that you talked about earlier, explain kind of the bits and pieces to inform the public a little more, because it is a very confusing sort of black hole type process that is very frustrating for folks. And Mr. Leplich, I just emailed you a specific situation that I've been working on for probably 3 years and not gotten a ton of feedback. So really happy to see this presentation tonight, really excited by the detail and data that you shared, but it is one of the bigger pebbles in a councilman's shoe in certain parts of town. And sadly, it's getting worse in certain areas. So I would really like to see some sort of attack plan, especially for the Markham neighborhoods, maybe in front of Payton, the Jepson area, some of our main thoroughfares that weren't meant to be main thoroughfares. I am all about hiring a consultant, doing a plan. Sometimes master plans take a million years and there's not a whole lot of action. So maybe a way to speed that up. But if we need to bring in additional resources to help draft plans, do studies, share ideas, because we have limited staffing resources, this is no knock on the staff. I think we need to do it. So Mr. Leplich, I'm hoping you could bring something forward at a later date that will help us get some plans, some action, and some responses to some of these areas that have been problem spots, probably since I was in high school myself. We know their problems and we need to fix them. So if we need to bring in outside sources or outside resources, I think that's great. If we need to earmark some funding in the budget to do some sort of traffic remediation attack plan, kind of like we do sidewalks, I think that's fantastic. There are 3 or 4 problem hotspots that impact children, families, and vulnerable people that all of us could probably speak to that we need to address sooner than later. So this has been eye-opening, really informative. Thank you so much. And again, some sort of public-facing way to inform the public, or that we can refer folks to when they call us with these complaints, and also maybe an action plan to finally take care of some of these problem areas would be really, really appreciated. Those are my comments.
Thank you, Councilmember. Looks like Councilmember Stockton is next.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. And thank you, colleagues, for your comments. I share the same frustrations and concerns as well, but I do appreciate that when I have contacted Public Works, they've been really good about getting those tube speed machines out to different locations. And I recognize that there are policies and procedures in place that either make or break you being able to add a stop sign or a traffic control device or do something different. The fear that I have with what's been happening is that it seems like until somebody dies, until a kid gets killed or somebody gets severely injured, right, that nothing happens. And I'm not blaming Public Works. I'm saying that there's a problem with the process. I would be, and I know your staffing is difficult, right? I know that we've taken steps to address that, and I know how hard the men and women of Public Works work. But I would be interested in your thoughts and following up with you to look at maybe a position, a staff person that's sole purpose is when they get these traffic complaints, they bring a pop-up, and they sit out with the crossing guard at a school or they sit out at a park and they do it for a week or they do it for 2 weeks or whatever. I mean, we just get a list and we can employ somebody to do that, because I just feel like without that consistency, without there being somebody that's communicating with those traffic guards or seeing the kids, at pick up and drop off at all the different schools, I think we're going to miss something, and I don't want to miss something before it's too late. So that's my comments as it relates to that. The other issue that I would really like to learn more about and know more about related to, traffic calming and congestion mitigation is, it wasn't that long ago when out on Jepson Parkway, when we are having these fires, that traffic was at a complete standstill. People are trying to evacuate. They're trying to get out of the neighborhoods because the fire's coming and people cannot get out. So I would really like to learn more about what we're doing to, widen streets or have a plan for, public safety officers to direct traffic maybe when, you know, the signal lights aren't the most efficient or effective way, because things can get a little crazy. And it happened throughout the whole city when those fires were coming. So, I mean, I think that kind of falls under the congestion mitigation. I think we really need to put a lot of effort into these fires. I know we've got more rain this year than last year, but we still don't have a lot of rain. And summer's coming, it gets hot here. And we got to prepare for these fires, and we've got to make sure that our people are able to get in and out to safety. So thank you for the presentation, very informative. I would love to talk to you offline and follow up on maybe like a position. I mean, I'd be totally willing to hire a staff person to really give the attention to these citizen concerns that I know that you may not be able to do due to staffing, because you know your people work hard. So thank you for your presentation.
Yeah, and anytime, give me a call.
Okay.
Councilmember Wiley.
All right, I just want to take a couple of minutes to say thank you also for your presentation and for stepping in to take this position on an interim basis, and thanks for your work that you're doing. I'm not going to reiterate everything, but we have the same issue with schools in our neighborhood. And besides parents just dropping off their kids and kids not walking to school, it's the lack of school buses, because, you know, Vacaville doesn't run regular school buses and Travis doesn't run regular school buses when you're close to the school. So I think both of those are issues that relate to problems at school. And I had calls this week from constituents about issues that were happening in the parking lot, and it is a big problem. So I'll just say that's true. And I am in the south part of town, so our streets are wider, but then that leads also to increased speed. And then you're out here having to replace the roundabouts, or not replace them, but repair the roundabouts, because people run into the edges of them, or repair the walls. Just last week, the wall was being repaired where someone had, you know, just run into the walls. So speed is a real big issue here. And because of the streets are wider, it's harder for pedestrians to cross safely with that speed. And I've been talking about that for several times with Public Works as well. And the other thing, that wide streets and speed, is people spinning out with donuts. And that's so difficult, because I hear them and I see them, but by the time you call the police, you know, they're gone. So I don't know what can best be done with those situations. And my last comment, also with just Public Works, is the condition of many of the street signs in the district. And I know that not just the district, but the city. And I know that there is a plan underway to replace them incrementally, but I'm just not seeing a lot of replaced street signs. And that is an issue with driving. So thanks for what you're doing. We're going to always hear traffic and speed, and we need to work to try to make it best for all our residents. Thank you.
Councilmember Sullivan.
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate it. I wanted to echo one of Councilmember Stockton's comments. Actually, all of his comments I agreed with, but the first was, I really do appreciate your staff. And I think this is definitely a resource issue, not a lack of trying issue. I think you guys have been under-resourced for years and years and years, and it's just been something that's been hard to address. So I hope my comments tonight aren't taken critically to your staff. They do a great job. I just think we need more resources. The second piece is, this is an informational item tonight, and I think you've heard at least from 4 council members that have very strong feelings about this. So I guess my question is probably to the city manager. I don't just want to provide feedback into a vacuum and have issues like this linger like they've been for a while. And I'm not trying to point fingers or place fault, but can we confirm this will come back to council with some action plans or options or something at some point in time, versus just us sharing feedback and potentially not hearing back? I'd like to set some firm next steps on this one, because it is a life and death issue. And it's something that, you know, quite frankly, has, in my experience on council, gone sort of unaddressed for pretty much the whole time I've been here. So what are the next steps? When should we expect something tangible or some ideas or some sort of process after this?
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, council members. So no, this is, well, it was intended to be an informational item. It was also for us to gather your thoughts and your concerns and your priorities on it, which you've all shared with us tonight. And we'll certainly take those into consideration as we move forward. As far as next steps, you know, we're currently doing quite a few things in Public Works with a departmental assessment, potentially a new director coming on board. So there's going to be some transition going forward. But I will work with Mr. Leftwich going forward on, what are the next steps in terms of evaluating some of the key areas that you have identified for us tonight, ways to improve the communication process, and coming back with some more updated information on some of those priority areas that you've identified and just more of the nature of how things occur. So you'll definitely see that. And then you'll also probably see this showing up in the budget process as well when we begin that in April, May.
Fantastic. That's great. Thank you.
Okay, so we'll move on to the last item. Looks like 9C, and we'll have the chief come on.
Good evening again, Mayor, Vice Mayor, Council members. I'm going to be real quick here. Next slide, please. As usual, the latest numbers, California in the last 2 weeks has gone over a little over 8.1 million cases. That's an addition of about 644,000 cases in the last 2 weeks, up to 80,640 deaths, an additional about 2,500 over the last 2 weeks. Good news is 7-day positivity is down to 8.8%, which is a reduction in the last 7 days of 4.8%, but about half of what that positive percentage was about just 2 weeks ago. Here locally, we are at 73,861 cases in Solano County. It's an addition of about 5,500 cases in the last 2 weeks. We have 2,308 active cases as of the last report, which was yesterday afternoon. That's a decrease. So we've got actually less than half of the active cases we had as compared to 2 weeks ago. There are 87 people hospitalized right now, which is again a 75-person reduction from 2 weeks ago. And our ICU availability has increased by 6% to 21%. There have been to date 388 deaths due to COVID in Solano County. And our positivity rate in the county is at 10.4%, which is a 6.7% reduction in the last 7 days. And again, about half of what it was 2 weeks ago. In Vacaville, 18,263 cases, an increase of about 1,500 cases over the last 2 weeks. Next slide, please. As far as the latest information, Omicron, as we told you before, overtook Delta as the dominant variant in the US. It seemed to have peaked in the country in early January. We here locally are a little bit behind as far as our peak. We peaked right around mid-January instead of early January, whereas some like the East Coast, like New York, their numbers are almost down to where they were prior to the Omicron spike. We are still above those numbers. In the state of emergency is still in effect, but the good news is that the governor has announced that he is allowing the indoor mask mandate for regardless of vaccination status to expire on February 15th. So that means that as of February, which is a week from today, that means that those that are fully vaccinated are not mandated to wear masks indoors any longer. They are still, CDPH is still recommending unvaccinated wear masks indoors. The other thing too that changes is that mega events has increased to 1,000 people indoors and 10,000 people outdoors. And so as far as the county is concerned, since they stick with the state rules, that mask mandate has been dropped. However, here in the city of Vacaville, as a reminder, we do still have a mandate that requires mask use indoors regardless of vaccine status until such time that the county is in the moderate transmission tier. We are still in the high transmission tier, so we're still 2 tiers above that, hopefully with a rate that the cases are dropping, that we can get into the moderate tier sometime soon. But until we get to that until we get to that point, the mask mandate is going to stay in place for city facilities, regardless of the county's mask mandate. And then next slide, please. As a reminder, it's been almost 30 days since you last extended the resolution 2021-088 with regard to remote meetings under AB 361. And so if you choose to renew it tonight, that extends the remote meetings through March 12th of 2022. Next slide, please. Our recommendation is that you adopt the subject resolution. And as a reminder, City Attorney Melinda Stewart is on the line in case you have any questions with regard to that. And that concludes my presentation, and I am happy to answer questions if you have any.
Thank you very much. I'm going to go to public comment. I see no public comment. I'm going to close public comment. And I don't see any hands up, so I'm going to start by saying I don't mind extending this, but I do want, and I'll ask the city attorney, I do want us to bring back, if the governor is going to say it's okay to be indoors without a mask, I'm not going to be going farther than the governor's mandate in Vacaville. So I would want us to bring it back to be in line with the state of California. If the state of California is not requiring masks, the city of Vacaville shouldn't be requiring masks indoors. So I don't know if I can motion that all in tonight because it's all COVID related, or if you want me just to do this motion and then I can say it in my comments as a council member.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think I like your second idea. I think the appropriate way would be to act on this motion and then, make a direction in your council comments or as part of this to bring it back. We are looking at the governor's orders, but we also have to look at Cal OSHA guidelines and what they require for protecting employees in the workplace. So there are a couple of different statutory schemes that we need to look at when we're thinking.
Yeah, I don't want to violate any law.
Right.
But I don't want to go farther than everyone else is going because we think that's the right thing to do. So what I'll do is I'll make the motion to approve this and also ask for that item to come back. And if there's some law that says we have to by whatever standards, well, then we don't even have to bring it back. But if it's up to this council, then I want this council to decide, are we going to go farther than the governor is going on this? So that's my motion.
I second the motion.
Thank you.
Ron, are we doing the two things at once? I'm confused because
we're going to do the two things at once. She said it was okay if I made the motion and then said bring it back for council to look at.
So are we doing two separate votes? Is that what we're doing right now?
No, we're doing one vote, one motion.
Okay. I did have a quick comment that I wanted to make, Ron, based on your comments. Melinda actually touched right on it, but I actually agree 100% with what you're saying right now. The conflict that we're having in my day job is, in fact, the Cal OSHA difference. And so a couple times throughout the pandemic, the governor's office says one thing, Cal OSHA has said another, and it puts jurisdictions in sort of awkward liability status if they don't look at Cal OSHA. So your motion covers that perfectly, but there is the likely possibility that Cal OSHA may not catch up with the government. So we'll just need to kind of pay attention to both.
And we have 2 weeks before we're going to see each other again.
Cool.
Okay, so I have a motion. The second, can we have a roll call vote?
Councilmember Wiley?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Roberts?
Yes.
Councilmember Stockton?
I've been experiencing some health issues, and the last one required emergency surgery. It took me 5.5 hours to get through the North Bay ER due to the long line of COVID people, and I'm still recovering. So I just wanted to give an explanation, but these meetings are helpful for me considering that. And if I need to follow up, I know that I can get there from home. So I am going to vote yes.
Councilmember Ritchie?
Yes.
Councilmember Silva?
Yes.
Councilmember Sullivan?
Yes.
Mayor Roulette?
Yes. And then we'll thank you, council. We'll move on to the city manager report. City manager, do you have anything tonight?
No, I do not, Mayor. Thank you.
Okay, city council report. Anybody from the city council? Yes, thank you. Oh, I spoke too soon. Now I got all the hands coming up. Go ahead, Councilmember Stockton.
Oh, I just wanted to update the public. Councilmember Sullivan and I have been making a lot of progress with the homeless 2x2, working with other city council members from the different cities throughout the county. And I'm excited to, we're getting ready to take part in a symposium that's being put on by the county for us to really strategize how we're going to address homelessness on a regionalized effort. So I'm very excited about that. And the other thing that I wanted to bring up is that on January 30th, Richard Rico from the Reporter wrote his last column in the Reporter. He's dedicated 58 years of his life to Vacaville through the Reporter, keeping us connected, making us laugh, making us think about different topics, and always challenging our community to be better and do better. And so I wanted to thank Mr. Rico and his family for their contributions over the years to Vacaville, and wish him well in the rest and whatever he chooses to do in his next adventure. So thank you.
Thanks, sir. Councilmember Sullivan, go ahead, sir.
Councilmember Stockton, great comments. I appreciate you bringing all of those up. First comment really quickly is we have been meeting as a 3x3 with the school district as well, kind of an ad hoc for the last, I don't know, probably 6 months or so. Councilmember Stockton, myself, and Councilmember Sullivan have been meeting with 3 school board representatives. We've actually been meeting just elected to elected. So I wanted to let you guys know that we did finally kind of come to consensus on the next year and sort of our priorities. And so the top 4 priorities right now at this point, the number 1 priority we'd like to talk about over the next year is exploring new school funding, particularly in some of the newer developments in town, and also how kind of city plans would sort of coordinate with the neighborhood plans, and also trying to really support the efforts to get new schools in some areas where we really need some new schools. So I know we've been talking a lot about east of Leisure Town and North Village and some other areas. So we're working on how the city can be an active partner in that process. The second piece, and Councilmember Silva brought this up earlier today, is what we're calling a school traffic safety commission that would conduct reviews on specific school sites where city staff and school district staff really dive in and figure out what we can do in some of these really high problem areas. So this item dovetails very nicely with the traffic discussion we just had. The third item is to review the joint use facilities process, agreement, and history. So the school district and the city have an agreement formally to kind of share properties, specifically recreational properties and a few other things. That is sort of kind of taken a back burner over the last couple of years. So we want to kind of rehash that, revamp that, and see how we could partner better for our kids and our parks and rec programs. And then the last item that we want to discuss is a coordinated approach on school developer fees and with new or existing housing and a study session. So really looking at how the city council can be active partners with the school district to get them as much resources as we can get them to build new schools. They've just been really kind of one hand tied behind their back for the last couple of years. So those are the 4 topics we are actively working on with the 3x3 over the next year, we hope. The city manager and the superintendent will be sort of working on the next steps on those pieces. So just wanted to let you guys know that's the progress we've made, and we're pretty excited about it. The last, and he'll probably hate me for saying this, but I wanted to wish our city manager a very happy birthday. I was going to suggest we sing happy birthday to him, but I think that would embarrass him terribly. So I just wanted to say happy birthday, city manager, and that's my comments.
Thank you very much. Appreciate the comments. We'll move to item 12. It's closed session. We have no closed session tonight. So we'll move to item 13. Good night, Vacaville.